a cosmic void dragon, and erased the Night King with a single thought. He didn't just walk into Mordor, he crushed the One Ring in the palm of his hand and forced the Dark Lord into oblivion. But now, the Supreme Monarch has stepped through a portal into a universe where cosmic forces dictate reality, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. With 5 Infinity Stones orbiting his palm and the Avengers watching in absolute awe, Arthur has rewritten the timeline. He has drawn out the ultimate threat years before the destined war. The sky over Earth has gone dark. The Sanctuary too has arrived. A god of infinite stats versus the Mad Titan, Thanos. Can a being with no limits truly conquer the fundamental laws of creation, or has the Supreme Monarch finally met his match? Hit play to witness the ultimate multiverse domination. Chapters in this episode: Midnight, The Awakening in Westeros 12:15, Breaking the Kingslayer 28:40, The Void Dragon Oblivion 45:10, Erasing the Army of the Dead and Ascension 58:30, Realm 02. Bending the One Ring 1 hour 15 minutes and 20 seconds, Realm 03, The Battle of New York 1 hour 32 minutes and 45 seconds, Collecting the Infinity Stones 1 hour 48 minutes and 10 seconds, Thanos Arrives. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications if you want to see Arthur unleash his full godhood against the Mad Titan in the next episode. Let us know in the comments, which universe should the Supreme Monarch conquer next? Title: Reborn in Game of Thrones Chapter 1, The Awakening. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine a medieval world where seasons can last for years, where life is incredibly cheap, and where the northern half of the continent is a frozen, brutal wasteland. They call this world Westeros. The first thing I registered when I woke up there was the cold. It was a biting, bone-deep chill that seemed to seep straight through my thin, ratty wool tunic. I gasped, eyes snapping open to a canopy of frost-tipped pines and a grey, unforgiving sky. This wasn't my apartment. This wasn't modern Earth. A sudden, agonizing spike of pain drove me to my knees. Memories that weren't mine flooded my mind. I was in the body of Arthur. 15 years old. An orphan of the Wolfsudde massive, deadly forest in the north, surviving by trapping and stealing. In this world, a peasant orphan like me was meant to die young, starving and forgotten. I remembered freezing. I remembered the original Arthur dying. And then, a sound chimed in my head. It wasn't just a synthetic tone, it was a resonating, divine hum that seemed to vibrate through the very fabric of reality. System initializing. Soul synchronization complete. Reality parameters bypassed. The Supreme Monarch system is now active. Infinite potential unlocked. A translucent, gold-rimmed screen hovered in my field of vision. Even if you've never played a video game, you'd recognize the aura of absolute power radiating from it. Host has received an Overlord starter package. Would you like to open it? Yes, I breathed, the freezing wind howling harmlessly around me as a golden, magical barrier seemed to form. Overlord starter package opened. Reward 1, Elixir of the First Men, grants perfect genetics, cures all ailments, maxes out base potential. Reward 2, Skill Book, Sword God's Legacy, level, max, passive. Reward 3, Infinite Spatial Ring, a magical ring containing infinite storage and 10,000 gold coins. Reward 4, Passive Aura, Conqueror's Will, immunity to fear, mental attacks, and extreme weather. A crystalline vial filled with swirling, starlit liquid materialized in my hand. I didn't hesitate. I uncorked the vial and downed the elixir. Agony was replaced by pure, unadulterated ecstasy. My malnourished, starving muscles expanded, knitting together into dense, perfect cords of strength. My vision sharpened until I could see the individual veins on a leaf 50 yards away. The deadly chill of the north vanished, replaced by an inner fire that made the sub-zero air feel like a gentle spring breeze. I didn't just survive. I was reborn, a god among ordinary men. Chapter 2, The Edge of the Blade. The next few minutes were spent marveling at my new reality. I slipped the magical storage ring onto my finger and willed the system interface open. Name, Arthur. Age, 15. Level, 1, 0/1,000 EXP. Class, Supreme Monarch. Attributes, note, an average adult human has a score of 10. Strength, 50. Agility, 65. Vitality, 100. Instant regeneration active. Intelligence, 40. Charisma, 35. Skills, Sword God's Legacy, max. Conqueror's Will, max. Trapping, LV2, Stealth, LV1. My stats were monstrous. I was 5 times stronger than a fully grown, trained knight, faster than a striking viper, and practically unkillable. I picked up the golden skill book that had appeared from my rewards. The moment my mind brushed it, it dissolved into a blinding light that shot straight into my soul. Skill learned, Sword God's Legacy, max. Information didn't just cascade into my brain, it rewrote my instincts. Every martial art, every sword stance, every parry and fatal strike ever conceived was suddenly second nature. I drew the rusty iron short sword from my belt. In my hands, it didn't feel like a clumsy iron bar, it felt like a deadly extension of my arm. Quest triggered, First Blood. Objective, annihilate the impending ambush. Reward, 10,000 EXP, 1x Valyrian Steel Longsword, Eclipse, 10 free attribute points. Failure, impossible. My lips curled into a smirk. Impending ambush? The snap of a twig shattered the silence of the woods. I didn't even bother to turn around. 3 men stepped out from the treeline. They were filthy, wrapped in stolen animal furs, with wild eyes and rotting teeth. Bandits. In a lawless forest like this, they preyed on the weak. Look the largest one sneered, hefting a crude wood-chopping axe. A little pup playing with a rusty toy. Hand over the silver, boy, and he didn't get to finish his sentence. Chapter 3, The wolf's bite. I didn't step, I vanished. With 65 agility, my movement was a blur that human eyes simply couldn't track. The large bandit's jaw was still open midward when I appeared directly in front of him. I didn't even swing hard. I simply flicked my wrist, channeling my max-level sword skills through the rusted iron blade. The blade sliced through the thick wooden handle of his axe, through his thick fur armor, and cleanly through his torso with zero resistance. For a second, the bandit just stood there. Then, his top half slid cleanly off his bottom half, hitting the snow with a wet thud. Enemy defeated. Plus 500 EXP. What in the blazes, the second bandit screamed, stumbling backward and drawing a jagged hunting knife. The third panicked, frantically trying to load an arrow into his shortbow. I let out a soft sigh. It was almost too easy. I casually tossed my rusty short sword into the air. Before it reached its peak, I kicked the hilt with a whip-crack snap of my leg. The rusty blade shot forward like a bullet, burying itself to the hilt directly between the archer's eyes. He dropped dead instantly. The last bandit dropped his knife, falling to his knees in terror. My conqueror's will aura was leaking out of me, paralyzing him with an overwhelming, primal fear that he couldn't fight off. Mercy, my lord. Please, he sobbed, pressing his face into the snow. You hunt in this forest, you die in this forest, I said, my voice echoing with an unnatural, commanding authority. I stepped forward and snapped his neck with a casual tap of my boot. Enemies defeated. Plus 1000 EXP quest complete, first blood level up. Level up. Level up. Host has reached level 10. Chapter 4, The Spoils of War. I stood amidst the carnage, completely unfazed. The elixir had altered my mind just as much as my body, the sight of blood and death didn't sicken me. I felt like an apex predator who had just swatted away some annoying flies. Rewards distributed, 10,000 EXP, 1x Valyrian Steel Longsword, Eclipse, 10 free attribute points. I opened my magical spatial ring and summoned my new weapon. You need to understand what Valyrian Steel is in this world. It's a lost, magical metal forged in ancient dragon fire. It never loses its edge, it's impossibly light, and a single sword made of it is worth an entire kingdom. My new sword, Eclipse, was a masterpiece. The blade was forged of rippling, smoke-dark metal, glowing with an incredibly faint, ethereal purple hum. It weighed almost nothing in my hand, yet I knew it could slice through heavy knight's armor like butter. I nudged the bandit bodies with my boot, my superhuman intelligence stat allowing me to instantly spot an anomaly in the leader's tunic. I pulled out a rolled-up piece of parchment. It was a map of the forest, with a large red X marked near a bend in a nearby river. Beside the X was a hastily scrawled word, Stark. To understand the name Stark, you have to know that they are the absolute ruling family of the North. They are the kings of this frozen half of the continent, practically royalty, commanding armies of thousands. New quest triggered, the heir's ransom. Objective, wipe out the bandit camp at the river and rescue the captive Stark. Reward, 50,000 EXP, title, Shadow Monarch of the North, 1x Mythic Dire Wolf Mount Egg. If these petty bandits had somehow managed to capture a member of the Stark family, returning him wouldn't just be a favor, it would be the absolute subjugation of the greatest lords in the land to my power. A peasant orphan was nothing. A supreme being who held the life of their ruling bloodline in his hands? That was how you conquered a continent. Chapter 5, The Road to Winterfell. 2 hours. That was all it took. What would have been a grueling, 2-day death march through deep, freezing snow for a normal man took me exactly 120 minutes. With infinite stamina and absurd agility, I bounded through the dense, snow-laden woods, leaping from branch to branch like a phantom. I arrived at the bend in the river long before the sun even began to set. I stood on the edge of a high cliff, looking down into a small ravine. Below, 5 heavily armed men sat around a roaring fire, drinking and laughing. Tethered to a tree on the edge of the camp was a magnificent horse. Its saddlebags bore the symbol of a giant, mythical wolf, the family crest of House Stark. And sitting in the dirt, hands bound tightly with thick rope, was a young boy with auburn hair and a fierce, stubborn scowl. This was Robb Stark, the eldest son and heir to the entire northern kingdom. He was bruised and bleeding, but his eyes burned with defiance. The bandits were loudly bragging about the mountain of gold they would extort from his father, completely oblivious to the god of death standing 50 feet above them. I checked my status one last time. Level, 10 HP, 5,000/5,000 equipped, Valyrian Steel Eclipse skills, Sword God's Legacy, max. 5 men. If I wanted to, I could level the entire ravine with a single sword strike, but I needed to keep the Stark boy alive. I didn't need to wait for nightfall. I didn't need to sneak around or plan a tactical advantage. I drew Eclipse, the dark, magical steel singing a lethal, whispering tune in the frigid air. I stepped off the edge of the cliff, free falling toward the camp below, a cold, predatory smile spreading across my face. The rulers of this world thought they controlled everything, playing their petty games of politics and war. It was time to show them what real power looked like. Chapter 6, The Fall of Mortals. I hit the ground like a meteor. With 100 vitality and my superhuman strength, the 50-foot drop didn't even sting my knees. Instead, the kinetic energy of my landing transferred directly into the frozen earth. A shockwave of snow, dirt, and shattered rock exploded outward, extinguishing the bandits' campfire instantly and throwing 3 of the men off their feet. Silence descended on the ravine, save for the settling dust and the panicked whinny of the Stark horse. The bandits scrambled to their feet, coughing and drawing their crude weapons, their eyes wide with confusion and terror. They looked at me, a 15-year-old boy in ragged peasant clothes who had just dropped from the sky. "What in the 7 hells is that?" one of them shrieked, aiming a crossbow. He fired. To a normal person, the heavy iron bolt would have been a lethal blur. To me, with 65 agility, it looked like it was floating through the air through thick molasses. I didn't even dodge. I simply reached out and caught the bolt by the wooden shaft, inches from my face. The bandits froze, their jaws slack. Even the young Robb Stark, still tied up in the dirt, stopped struggling, his eyes wide as saucers. "My turn," I said. I moved. I didn't bother using any fancy sword techniques from the Sword God's legacy, these men weren't worth the effort. I dashed forward, the world blurring around me. I swung Eclipse. The Valyrian steel didn't just cut, it glided through the air, completely silent. I severed the crossbowman's head from his shoulders before he could even blink. I spun, the dark blade effortlessly slicing through the thick iron chainmail of the second bandit, cleaving him diagonally from shoulder to hip. The remaining 3 turned to run, finally understanding that they had just picked a fight with a monster. It didn't matter. I threw the crossbow bolt I was still holding, burying it into the back of the third man's knee, dropping him to the dirt. In a flash, I was behind the other 2. A simple, horizontal slash decapitated them simultaneously. The entire fight lasted less than 3 seconds. Enemies defeated. Plus 2,500 EXP quest complete, the heir's ransom. Rewards distributed, 50,000 EXP, title, Shadow Monarch of the North, 1x Mythic Direwolf Mount Egg. Level up. Host has reached level 15. I flipped Eclipse, the blood sliding off the magical dark steel without leaving a single stain, and sheathed it. Chapter 7, The Shadow Monarch. I walked over to the last surviving bandit, the one writhing in the dirt with a bolt in his knee. He was sobbing, begging to his gods. I didn't say a word. I just stomped on his chest, crushing his ribs and ending his miserable existence. I turned my attention to the boy in the dirt. Robb Stark. The heir to the greatest kingdom on the continent, currently covered in mud and staring at me like I was a ghost. I knelt beside him and drew a small, ordinary hunting knife to cut his thick rope bindings. I didn't want to accidentally cut him in half with my magical sword. What are you?" Robb stammered, rubbing his raw wrists as the ropes fell away. His voice shook, but to his credit, he didn't cower. He had the pride of a ruler's son. "My name is Arthur," I said calmly. "And I'm the one who just saved your life." Before he could ask any more questions, I opened my system interface mentally and equipped my new title. Title equipped, Shadow Monarch of the North effect, plus 50 charisma when dealing with northern citizens. Grants an aura of absolute authority. Lesser beings will feel compelled to kneel. The moment the title activated, the air around me seemed to grow heavy. Robb visibly swallowed hard, taking a half step back. The defiance in his eyes warred with an overwhelming, instinctual urge to bow his head. "We need to leave," I commanded, my voice resonating with that new, magical authority. "Gather your things, little lord. It's getting dark." "I am Robb Stark," he said, trying to muster his aristocratic dignity, though his voice cracked slightly. "My father is the Lord of Winterfell. He will reward you handsomely for this, Arthur." "I don't care about your father's gold," I replied, walking over to the dead bandits to collect any useful items. I casually tossed a heavy sack of stolen silver into the air, and it vanished into my invisible spatial storage ring. Robb blinked, rubbing his eyes. Where did that sack go?" "Magic," I said flatly. "Don't worry about it." Chapter 8, The Mythic Beast. Before we started the trek back to his home, I needed to check my other reward. I willed the Mythic Direwolf Mount Egg out of my inventory. A massive egg, the size of a watermelon and colored like a stormy night sky, materialized in my hands. It pulsed with a warm, terrifying energy. To the people of this world, direwolves were the symbol of House Stark, massive beasts that hadn't been seen south of the giant ice wall in centuries. They were myths. "Would you like to hatch the Mythic Direwolf Mount Egg?" "Yes." The egg cracked. A burst of icy blue light blinded us for a second. When it faded, sitting in the snow was a wolf pup. But it wasn't a normal pup. Its fur was a pure, shimmering black that seemed to absorb the light around it, and its eyes burned like 2 sapphire flames. "Familiar hatched, Mythic Shadow Direwolf, please name your familiar." "Ragnarok," I muttered. The moment I named it, the system's magic surged. The pup threw back its head and howled. As it howled, its body began to expand rapidly, muscles bulging, bones cracking and lengthening. Within 10 seconds, the adorable pup had grown into an absolute monster. Ragnarok was the size of a large warhorse. His teeth were the length of daggers, and a faint, shadowy mist clung to his black fur. He looked at me, lowered his massive head, and nudged my shoulder affectionately. I looked over at Robb. The heir to the north had completely fallen onto his backside in the snow, his mouth hanging open in sheer disbelief. A direwolf was his family's sacred animal, and I had just summoned a magical, giant one out of thin air. "I think," Robb whispered, trembling, "I might be losing my mind." Get on your horse, Rob, I said, casually vaulting onto Ragnarok's massive, fur-covered back. The beast easily supported my weight. We have a long ride ahead of us. Chapter 9, The Journey South. The journey to Winterfell, the fortress capital of the north, took 3 days. It would have taken much longer, but Ragnarok's terrifying presence ensured that no predators or bandits dared to come within a mile of us. During the ride, Rob pelted me with questions. Where did I learn to fight like that? Where did the wolf come from? How did I make things disappear? I answered with half-truths and silence. I let the Shadow Monarch title do the heavy lifting, projecting an aura of ancient, untouchable mystery. I told him I was a traveler, blessed by the old gods, tasked with clearing the rot from the world. In this superstitious medieval society, playing the part of a divine emissary was the easiest way to explain my godlike stats. By the second day, Rob stopped treating me like a peasant who had gotten lucky. He treated me with the careful, deferential respect one gives to a sleeping dragon. Winterfell is just over the next ridge, Rob announced on the third afternoon, pointing ahead. He looked exhausted, covered in grime, but relief washed over his face. Good, I said, patting Ragnarok's neck. I'm getting tired of sleeping in the snow. With a gentle mental command, my vitality regeneration instantly cleared away any fatigue I felt. I wasn't actually tired, but it was important to pretend to have some human limitations. For now. Chapter 10, The Gates of Winterfell. We crested the ridge, and the ancient fortress came into view. For a non-viewer of this world, imagine the most imposing, massive medieval castle you can think of, and then double it. Winterfell was a sprawling complex of dark grey stone walls, towering keeps, and massive iron gates. It was a fortress built to withstand winter seasons that lasted for a decade. As we approached the main gates, the guards on the walls spotted us. Or rather, they spotted Ragnarok. Shouts of alarm rang out. Crossbows were leveled at us from the battlements. The heavy iron portcullis began to lower. Hold your fire! Rob screamed, spurring his tired horse forward. It's me. Robb Stark. Lower your weapons. The captain of the guard peered over the edge, his face paling as he recognized the young heir. Lord Robb. Open the gates. Open the gates immediately. The massive wooden doors groaned open. Dozens of heavily armed guards rushed out, forming a protective circle around Robb, but they kept a terrified, wide berth from me and my giant shadow wolf. From the courtyard, a man pushed his way through the crowd. He was tall, with a stern, weathered face, dark hair, and a neatly trimmed beard. He wore a heavy fur cloak and carried an aura of grim authority that commanded absolute silence from his men. This was Eddard Ned Stark. The Lord of Winterfell, the Warden of the North, and one of the most powerful men in the entire world. He rushed forward and pulled Robb into a fierce hug. Robb. Thank the gods, he breathed, checking his son for injuries. Then, his steely grey eyes snapped up to me, resting on the back of the monstrous dire wolf. His hand instinctively went to the hilt of his massive broadsword. Father, Robb said quickly, stepping between us. Stay your blade. This is Arthur. He wiped out the bandit camp alone. He saved my life. Lord Stark looked at the pile of ragged peasant clothes I was wearing, then at the mythical, nightmarish beast I was riding, and finally at the dark, magical sword strapped to my waist. The clash of my appearance and my power was breaking his reality. I looked down at the ruler of the north, my Shadow Monarch title flaring invisibly. Lord Stark, I said, my voice echoing easily across the silent courtyard. We have much to discuss. Chapter 11, The Lord Solar. Eddard Stark's private office, known here as A Solar, was a stark reflection of the man himself, cold, practical, and devoid of unnecessary luxury. A heavy oak table dominated the center of the room, lit by the flickering glow of a stone hearth. I stood before the desk, Ragnarok sitting obediently at my side. The giant shadow wolf took up a quarter of the room, his red eyes tracking every movement Lord Stark made. Behind Ned stood 2 of his most trusted guards, hands resting nervously on their sword hilts. You understand my position, Arthur, Ned said, his deep voice carrying the weight of a man used to ruling. My son tells me a 15-year-old boy dropped from the sky, slaughtered 5 hardened killers in 3 seconds, and summoned a mythical beast from thin air. He claims you wield a sword of black Valyrian steel, a metal rarer than dragon's blood. He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. I am a practical man. I do not believe in fairy tales. So, tell me the truth. Who are you, and who sent you? I didn't blink. My Shadow Monarch title was humming, effortlessly pushing back against his commanding presence. With my 40 intelligence, his interrogation tactics felt incredibly transparent. No one sent me, Lord Stark, I replied evenly. And your son told you exactly what happened. As for the truth? The truth is that the world is much larger, and much more ancient, than the politics of men. I slowly drew a clips an inch from its scabbard. The guards tensed, but I just let the dark, rippling steel catch the firelight. You know what this is, I said. Valyrian steel. It cannot be forged anymore. It cannot be faked. If I were an assassin or a spy, why would I use the most recognizable, valuable weapon on the continent to reveal myself? Ned's jaw tightened. He knew I was right. A sword like this was worth more than a fleet of warships. It didn't belong in the hands of a peasant. You saved my heir, Ned finally said, the tension in his shoulders dropping slightly. For that, House Stark owes you a debt that cannot be easily repaid. You will have a place here in Winterfell. Food, shelter, and a seat at my table. But you will be watched, Arthur. Quest triggered, the Warden's Trust objective, solidify your position in Winterfell before the king arrives. Reward, 15,000 EXP, 5 free attribute points. Thank you, Lord Stark, I said, a faint smile touching my lips. I accept. Chapter 12, The Feast of Wolves. That evening, the Great Hall of Winterfell was alive with roaring fires, the smell of roasted meat, and the boisterous laughter of northern lords. It was a feast thrown to celebrate Robb's safe return. To a newcomer, the hierarchy of this medieval society was obvious just by looking at the room. At the raised table sat the Stark family, Lord Ned, his stern-looking wife Catelyn, Robb, and his younger siblings, a beautiful girl named Sansa, a tomboy named Arya, and a young boy named Bran. Down in the lower benches sat the soldiers, servants, and lesser lords. And then there was me. Because I had saved the heir, I was seated at a table near the Starks. Every eye in the room was on me, or more accurately, on Ragnarok, who was resting his massive head in my lap, casually chewing on a whole roasted pig thigh. You eat like a lord, a quiet voice said beside me. I turned to see a boy around my age. He had the classic Stark look, dark hair, grey eyes, and a solemn face, but he wasn't sitting at the high table with the family. His clothes were of good quality, but plain. And you look like a Stark, but you sit down here, I noted, my high intelligence instantly piecing together the lore. He offered a bitter, half smile. I am Jon Snow. The bastard of Winterfell. In this world, a bastard was a child born outside of marriage, carrying a terrible social stigma. They weren't allowed to inherit lands or titles. Jon was Ned Stark's illegitimate son, and his wife Catelyn clearly despised the boy for it. Arthur, I introduced myself, tossing a piece of bread to Ragnarok. Don't let the seating arrangements bother you, Jon. Titles are just words men invent to feel important. Power is all that actually matters. Jon looked at me, then at the mythical beast eating out of my hand. Robb told me what you did to those men. He said you moved faster than the eye could see. Robb exaggerates, I lied smoothly. I just know how to swing a sword. Before Jon could reply, the heavy wooden doors of the great hall banged open. A mud-splattered messenger rushed in, carrying a scroll sealed with golden wax. The room fell dead silent as the man knelt before Lord Stark. My lord, the messenger gasped. A raven from the capital. King Robert Baratheon is riding north. He comes to Winterfell. World event triggered, the King's Descent. The Game of Thrones has officially begun. Chapter 13, The Sparring Yard. The news of the King's impending arrival threw Winterfell into a frenzy of preparation. The King ruled the entire continent, a man named Robert who had won his throne in a massive rebellion years ago. If the King was coming all the way to the frozen north, it meant he wanted something from Ned Stark. 2 days later, I found myself in the dusty sparring yard in the courtyard. The air was filled with the clatter of wooden practice swords and the shouts of soldiers running drills. I stood near the weapon racks, watching the men train. With my maxed out sword god's legacy skill, watching them fight was like watching toddlers clumsily swing sticks. Their footwork was atrocious, their swings wide and unprotected. You look bored, boy, a gruff voice barked. I turned. It was Sir Roderick Castle, the master-at-arms of Winterfell. He was an older, stout knight with enormous white whiskers, responsible for training all the soldiers. Behind him stood a few smirking guardsmen who clearly wanted to see the mysterious newcomer taken down a peg. Just observing, Sir Roderick, I said politely. Observing won't save your life when steel is drawn, the old knight grunted, tossing me a heavy wooden practice sword. I caught it effortlessly with one hand. Lord Robb says you're a demon with a blade. Let's see what you've got. Theon. Step up. A young, arrogant-looking man with a smirk on his face stepped into the ring. This was Theon Greyjoy. He was a ward of House Stark, essentially a highborn hostage kept to ensure his rebellious father didn't start another war. Theon thought highly of his own fighting skills. Don't worry, peasant, Theon sneered, hefting a thick, iron-reinforced wooden shield and a practice sword. I'll go easy on you. I sighed, stepping into the dirt circle. I didn't even bother taking a fighting stance. I just let my wooden sword hang loosely at my side. Whenever you're ready, I said. Theon let out a shout and charged, swinging his practice sword in a wide, powerful arc aimed right at my head. With 65 agility, he might as well have been moving in slow motion. I didn't dodge. I simply raised my wooden sword and casually tapped the side of his incoming blade. My 50 strength, combined with the absolute perfect angle and leverage granted by my maxed sword skill, created a devastating result. Crack. Theon's thick wooden sword didn't just parry, it shattered into dozens of jagged splinters. The kinetic force traveled down his arm, dislocating his shoulder with a sickening pop. He screamed, dropping his shield and collapsing to his knees in the dirt. The yard fell deathly silent. Sir Roderick's jaw practically hit the floor. I hadn't even moved my feet. Enemy humiliated. Plus 500 EXP. I tossed the wooden practice sword back onto the weapon rack. Your footwork needs work, Theon, I said mildly, walking away. Chapter 14, The Royal Caravan. A month passed. Thanks to my display in the sparring yard, nobody bothered me anymore. Even the hardened veteran knights of the north gave me a wide berth. I spent the time exploring the vast wolfswood, farming bandits and wild predators for EXP, pushing my level up to 20. Then, the king arrived. It wasn't just a visit, it was an invasion of luxury. A massive procession of hundreds of horses, golden carriages, and heavily armored knights bearing the golden lion banners of House Lannister and the crowned stag of House Baratheon marched through the gates of Winterfell. I stood on a high balcony with Jon Snow, looking down at the courtyard as the Stark family lined up to kneel before their king. "That's him," Jon whispered, pointing. King Robert Baratheon was a massive man, but he had grown fat and red-faced from years of drinking and feasting. Beside him stood Queen Cersei Lannister, a woman of breathtaking beauty with golden hair and a cold, haughty expression. To understand the Lannisters, you just need to know they are the richest, most ruthless family in the realm. But my eyes didn't linger on the king or the queen. My gaze locked onto a man dismounting from a pristine white warhorse. He wore armor gilded in pure gold, and a white cloak flowed from his shoulders. He was devastatingly handsome, with the same golden hair as the queen, and he moved with the arrogant swagger of a man who knew he was dangerous. "Who is the one in the gold armor?" I asked. "Jaime Lannister," Jon replied, a note of disgust in his voice. "The queen's twin brother. They call him the Kingslayer. He's a member of the King's Guard, sworn to protect the king, but he stabbed the previous king in the back during the rebellion. They say he's the greatest swordsman alive." I narrowed my eyes. A translucent screen flickered into my vision. Target assessed, Jaime Lannister title, the Kingslayer threat level, low, to host. Note, a prodigy of swordsmanship. Bound by arrogance. I smiled. The greatest swordsman alive? In a world of ordinary men, perhaps. But I was no longer an ordinary man. Chapter 15, The Kingslayer's Pride. The arrival of the royal family meant a massive banquet that night. The great hall was packed to the brim, the air suffocatingly warm and loud. I sat at a corner table, nursing a cup of ale, Ragnarok resting heavily against my boots under the table. I was content to just watch the politics play out, but trouble has a way of finding power. Midway through the feast, the Golden Knight, Jaime Lannister, stood up from the royal table. He was a few cups of wine deep, a smug smile plastered on his face as he strolled through the lower tables. He was looking for entertainment. His eyes landed on me. Or rather, they landed on the pommel of Eclipse, protruding from the scabbard on my hip. The distinctive rippled steel was unmistakable to a trained eye. Jaime stopped at my table. The chatter around us died down instantly as the Northern Lords and Lannister guards noticed the confrontation. "I heard a rumor today," Jaime said, his voice smooth and carrying a subtle edge of mockery. "They said a ragged little peasant boy saved Lord Stark's son, using a blade of Valyrian steel. I thought it was a northern fairy tale. Yet, here you sit." I didn't stand up. I took a slow sip of my ale. "Rumors are often exaggerated, Sir Jaime." "Indeed," Jaime smirked, resting his hand casually on the hilt of his own master-crafted sword. "Valyrian steel is meant for lords and kings, boy. Not for a dirty commoner. A sword like that in hands that don't know how to use it is a tragedy. Why don't you hand it over? I'll give you a bag of gold to buy yourself a nice farm." The sheer arrogance of the man was astounding. He thought he could just bully me out of a mythical weapon because of his birthright. Warning, extreme hostility detected. New quest triggered, the Lion's Pride objective, shatter the Kingslayer's ego. Show him the absolute peak of martial prowess. Reward, 30,000 EXP, skill book, Aura of the Overlord. I set my cup down on the wooden table. The clack sounded like a gunshot in the suddenly silent hall. I looked up, meeting his emerald green eyes with an expression of absolute, freezing calm. "You are called the greatest swordsman in the realm, Kingslayer," I said, my voice echoing with the unnatural weight of the Shadow Monarch. "If you want my sword, you'll have to take it from me in the sparring yard tomorrow at dawn. But be warned." I leaned forward slightly. "If you draw steel against me, I will break more than just your pride." Chapter 16, Dawn in the Courtyard. The air in the north was always freezing at dawn, biting at the skin like tiny needles. But as the sun peeked over the massive stone walls of Winterfell, the sparring yard was completely packed. Word had spread like wildfire. A teenage peasant with a magical direwolf was going to duel the Kingslayer. To understand the stakes, you have to realize that the King's Guard, the 7 knights in white cloaks sworn to protect the king, are essentially the medieval equivalent of celebrity superheroes. They are supposed to be the deadliest men alive, and Jaime Lannister was considered the best among them. King Robert Baratheon himself had dragged a massive wooden chair out to the balconies, a horn of ale already in his hand despite the early hour. Beside him stood a deeply concerned Ned Stark and a furiously glaring Queen Cersei. I stood in the center of the dirt yard, wearing simple leather armor I had borrowed from the castle armory. Ragnarok, my massive shadow wolf, sat obediently on the sidelines, watching with intelligent, burning sapphire eyes. The crowd parted as Jaime Lannister walked into the ring. He wore his gilded, gleaming armor, but had foregone the helmet. His golden hair blew slightly in the wind, and his handsome face carried a relaxed, utterly confident smirk. He drew his sword. It was castle-forged steel, a masterpiece of normal blacksmithing, but it was nothing compared to magic. "I'll give you one last chance, boy," Jaime called out, playing to the crowd. "Kneel, hand over the Valyrian blade, and I'll only break your arm for your insolence last night." I sighed, slowly drawing Eclipse. The dark, rippling metal seemed to absorb the morning light. I didn't take a traditional fencing stance. I just let the sword hang casually by my side, resting my other hand on my hip. "Anytime you're ready, Kingslayer," I replied. The king let out a booming laugh from the balcony. The boy has stones, Jaime. Let's see if you can crack them. Jaime's smirk vanished, replaced by a cold, deadly focus. He moved. To a normal person, Jaime Lannister was a blur. He closed the 10-foot gap between us in a fraction of a second, thrusting his sword directly toward my shoulder, a crippling, non-lethal blow meant to humiliate me. But with my 65 agility and max-level sword God's legacy, he was moving through thick mud. Chapter 17, Breaking the Lion. I didn't even use my sword to block. As Jaime's blade lunged toward my shoulder, I simply pivoted my torso an inch to the left. The steel passed harmlessly by my ear. Jaime's eyes widened in shock, but his reflexes were elite. He instantly turned his failed thrust into a brutal horizontal slash aimed at my chest. This time, I brought Eclipse up. But I didn't block with the sharp edge, I hit the flat of his blade with the flat of mine. Clang. My 50 strength transferred through the Valyrian steel like a cannonball. The sheer kinetic force of the impact violently threw Jaime's arm backward, tearing his grip open and sending his beautiful, castle-forged sword spinning high into the air. It landed 30 feet away, sticking straight into the dirt. The entire courtyard went completely, absolutely silent. The king stopped drinking. Queen Cersei gripped the balcony railing so hard her knuckles turned white. Jaime stood frozen, his sword arm trembling uncontrollably from the impact, his empty hand hanging in the air. You're too tense, I said calmly, stepping into his guard. Before he could react or step back, I brought the heavy, rounded pommel of my sword up and slammed it directly into his gilded chest plate. The gold-plated steel crumpled inward with a sickening crunch. Jaime gasped, all the air leaving his lungs, and he collapsed onto his back in the dirt. He wheezed, staring up at the grey sky in absolute, shattered disbelief. The greatest swordsman in the world had been disarmed and dropped in exactly 2 moves. I rested the tip of Eclipse gently against his throat. Quest complete, the Lion's Pride. Rewards distributed, 30,000 EXP, Skill Book, Aura of the Overlord. Level up. Host has reached level 22. As I said, I whispered down to him, loud enough for only the 2 of us to hear. I break more than just pride. Chapter 18, The King's Proposition. By the gods. King Robert's voice boomed like thunder, breaking the stunned silence. He hoisted his massive frame out of his chair, roaring with laughter. Did you see that, Ned? He swatted him like a bloody fly. I sheathed my sword, turned my back on the wheezing Kingslayer, and offered a polite, shallow bow to the king on the balcony. Treason! Queen Cersei shrieked, her face twisted in ugly fury. Guards! Seize this peasant! He attacked a member of the king's guard. A dozen Lannister soldiers drew their swords and rushed into the yard. Instantly, Ragnarok let out a deafening, demonic roar that shook the very foundations of the castle. The giant shadow wolf leaped in front of me, bearing fangs the size of daggers. At the exact same time, 50 northern soldiers drew their own weapons, forming a protective ring around me. Ned Stark's men hadn't forgotten that I saved their lord's son. Hold! King Robert roared, his face purple with rage. He glared at his wife. Are you mad, woman? It was a fair duel. A duel Jaime provoked. Stand down, all of you, before I start taking heads. The Lannister guards nervously sheathed their swords and backed away from my snarling wolf. Cersei looked like she had swallowed a lemon, but she spun on her heel and stormed back inside the castle. Robert leaned over the balcony, looking down at me with burning curiosity. You, boy. Arthur. Bring your wolf and come up here. A few minutes later, I stood in the Lord's Solar with King Robert, Lord Ned Stark, and Ragnarok. I have fought in 100 battles, Robert said, pouring himself another horn of ale. I have seen the greatest warriors of our age. But I have never seen anyone move like that. And with Valyrian steel? I want you in my king's guard, boy. Come to the capital. I'll knight you myself. In this world, being named to the king's guard was the highest honor a warrior could achieve. You lived in the royal palace and were draped in glory. But I wasn't here to be a bodyguard for a drunk king. I was a supreme monarch. I am deeply honored, your grace, I said smoothly, letting my shadow monarch charisma weave into my words. But I have sworn my blade to House Stark. Lord Eddard's family took me in. My loyalty belongs to the north. Ned Stark looked at me, a profound look of respect and gratitude washing over his stern face. I had just rejected the king to swear loyalty to him. I now had the Warden of the North completely in the palm of my hand. Chapter 19, The Broken Tower. 2 days passed. The atmosphere in Winterfell was incredibly tense. Jaime Lannister had locked himself in his quarters, humiliated, while the king spent his days hunting in the woods. I decided it was time to cash in my new reward. I opened my inventory and activated the skill book I won from defeating Jaime. Skill learned, Aura of the Overlord, active. Effect, unleash a wave of crushing spiritual pressure. Weaker beings will be incapacitated. Grants the user an absolute sense of everything within a 100-yard radius. I triggered the skill. Instantly, my mind expanded outward. I could feel the heartbeat of a rat in the walls, I could hear the hushed whispers of servants 3 floors down. It was a radar system perfectly mapped onto my brain. And immediately, my radar picked up something very, very wrong in the abandoned, ruined tower of the castle. I saw 2 human life signs in a room at the top of the broken tower. Their heartbeats were erratic, fast. And climbing the outside wall of the tower, approaching the window of that exact room, was a third, much smaller life sign. Bran Stark. Ned's energetic 10-year-old son, who loved to climb the castle walls despite his mother's protests. To understand why this was bad, you have to know a terrible secret of this world. Queen Cersei and her twin brother, Jaime, were lovers. If they were hiding in that abandoned tower, and little Bran saw them, they would kill him to keep their secret. I vanished. With my agility and the map in my head, I blurred through the castle corridors like a ghost. I reached the bottom of the broken tower, grabbed the stone wall, and pulled myself straight up. I didn't climb, I practically ran vertically up the side of the ancient stone building. I reached the ledge just beneath the window a split second before Bran did. The boy was clinging to the gargoyles, reaching up to peek inside. I reached out and grabbed the back of his heavy woolen collar, pulling him firmly but gently away from the ledge. Bran gasped, startled, but before he could shout, I put a finger to my lips. Quiet, little lord, I whispered. The stones are loose up there. It's not safe. From inside the window above us, I could hear the faint, unmistakable sounds of Jaime and Cersei. I lowered Bran safely to a lower roof. Go back to the courtyard, Bran. Now. As the boy scampered away, looking confused, I looked up at the window. I had just saved the Stark boy's life, and in doing so, I had completely derailed a massive tragedy. Hidden plot divergence achieved. Reward, 10,000 EXP. The timeline has fractured. Chapter 20, The Hand's Shadow. The time came for the king to leave Winterfell and return to his capital city in the south, known as King's Landing. But things had changed. King Robert had convinced his old friend, Ned Stark, to come with him and serve as his Hand of the King. The Hand is essentially the Prime Minister, ruling the entire continent while the king drinks and hunts. This meant Ned would have to leave his home and take his two daughters, Sansa and Arya, into the viper's nest of royal politics. I was packing my few belongings into my infinite spatial ring when there was a knock on my chamber door. Ned Stark walked in, looking incredibly tired. The weight of his new promotion was already crushing him. Lord Stark, I greeted, offering a slight nod. Arthur, Ned sighed, pacing the stone floor. King's Landing is a city of liars and backstabbers. I am a soldier of the north. I do not know how to fight with whispers and poison. He stopped pacing and looked me dead in the eye. You turned down a white cloak to stay loyal to my house. You saved Robb from bandits. You put the Kingslayer in his place when he threatened us. I need a man I can trust. I need a sword that cannot be bought by Lannister gold. He reached out and placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. Come south with me, Arthur. Swear yourself as the personal sworn shield of my house. Protect my daughters in that cursed city. Name your price in gold or land, and you shall have it. I looked at the Lord of Winterfell. He was practically begging a teenager for protection, completely unaware that he was standing in the presence of a reincarnated anomaly with godlike stats. Heading to the capital was exactly what I wanted. It was where the true Game of Thrones was played. The richest lords, the deadliest assassins, and the most powerful secrets were all gathered in King's Landing. I don't want gold, Lord Eddard, I said softly, a dangerous, confident smile touching my lips. But I will come with you. I will protect your family. I patted the hilt of my Valyrian steel sword. Let the lions and the stags play their political games in the capital. It's time they learned what happens when a real monster enters the city. Chapter 21, The King's Road. The journey south from Winterfell to the capital city, King's Landing, took months. To understand the scale of Westeros, imagine a continent roughly the size of South America, with no paved roads, no cars, and a massive caravan of slow-moving carriages hauling royalty. We traveled down the King's Road, the main artery of the continent. The Stark household was traveling with the king's massive royal procession. I rode near the front, atop Ragnarok. My giant, shadow-furred direwolf had grown even larger, now the size of a draft horse. His presence alone kept the Lannister guards far away from us, muttering prayers to their gods whenever my wolf looked in their direction. Does he ever get tired? A small voice asked. I looked down to see Arya Stark, Ned's youngest daughter. She was a wild, tomboyish 9-year-old who hated dresses and loved swords. Walking beside her was her own direwolf pup, Nymeria, who looked like a tiny, fluffy toy compared to the terrifying monster I was riding. Ragnarok doesn't tire, I replied, tossing a piece of dried meat down to her pup. He's bound to me by magic. As long as I have strength, so does he. Will you teach me how to fight like you did with the Kingslayer? Arya asked, her grey eyes wide with admiration. Before I could answer, a sneering voice interrupted us. A little lady shouldn't be playing with swords, or talking to filthy commoners. It was Prince Joffrey Baratheon, the king's eldest son and the heir to the throne. He was a teenager with golden Lannister hair, a spoiled, arrogant face, and a cruel streak a mile wide. If there was ever a poster child for toxic entitlement, it was Joffrey. I glanced at him. My system automatically pulled up his stats. Target assessed, Joffrey Baratheon level, 2. Threat level, insignificant. Note, a sadistic coward hiding behind his mother's skirts. I didn't even bother acknowledging him. I just nudged Ragnarok, who let out a low, rumbling growl that sounded like an earthquake. Joffrey's expensive white horse panicked, rearing up and almost throwing the prince into the mud before galloping away. Arya burst into laughter. You're making dangerous enemies, Arthur, Lord Ned Stark warned, riding up beside me. Lions don't concern themselves with the opinions of sheep, Lord Stark, I said calmly. And I assure you, Prince Joffrey is nothing more than a bleeding lamb. Chapter 22, The River's Edge. A few weeks later, we stopped to camp near a river known as the Ruby Ford. It was here that my intervention in the timeline finally sparked a major confrontation. I was meditating near the trees, passively grinding my Conqueror's Will aura, when my superhuman hearing picked up the sound of a struggle and a girl's scream. It was Arya. I opened my eyes, locked onto the sound, and vanished. With my 65 agility, I cleared a quarter-mile of dense forest in less than 3 seconds. I burst into a small clearing near the riverbank. The scene was a mess. A young butcher's boy was cowering on the ground, bleeding from a slice on his cheek. Arya was standing over him, aggressively holding a wooden stick. And Prince Joffrey was advancing on them, holding a live, sharp steel sword, a malicious grin on his face. I'm going to cut you open, peasant, Joffrey spat, raising the heavy steel blade toward the defenseless butcher's boy. He swung the sword down. It never connected. I didn't draw eclipse. I didn't need to. I intercepted Joffrey's downward swing with my bare, unarmored hand. Clang. The sharp steel struck my palm and stopped dead, sounding as if it had struck a block of solid titanium. My 100 vitality and maxed physical defense meant human weapons couldn't even scratch my skin. Joffrey gasped, his eyes bulging out of his head as he stared at me holding the sharp edge of his sword with my bare fingers. Prince Joffrey, I said, my voice dripping with cold, terrifying authority. It is deeply dishonorable to draw live steel on an unarmed child. I squeezed my hand. The incredible pressure from my 50 strength crushed the castle-forged steel. The blade shattered into a dozen metallic shards, leaving Joffrey holding nothing but a broken hilt. Why you? Joffrey stammered, stepping back, his face draining of all color. I am the crown prince. I'll have your head. I unleashed a fraction of my aura of the Overlord. The air around me instantly grew heavy, thick with a suffocating, terrifying pressure. The butcher's boy fainted. Joffrey dropped his broken hilt, his knees buckling until he collapsed into the dirt, weeping in absolute, primal terror. Hostile action prevented. Plus 2000 EXP. Relationship with House Lannister, severely degraded. I looked down at the sobbing prince. Tell your mother whatever you want, boy. But if you ever raise a hand against a child under my protection again, I won't just break your sword. Chapter 23, The Viper's Nest. When the king found out about the incident, Queen Cersei demanded my hands be chopped off. King Robert, however, took one look at Joffrey crying, laughed uproariously, and told the boy to stop acting like a coward. Thanks to my incredible display of power in Winterfell, the king viewed me as an untouchable warrior prodigy, completely shielding me from the queen's political wrath. Eventually, the massive caravan arrived at King's Landing. For a newcomer, King's Landing is a sprawling, chaotic metropolis holding 500,000 people. It is a city of stunning wealth and abject poverty, overlooked by the Red Keep, a massive, crimson-stoned castle that sits on a high hill like a bloody crown. It also smelled like 1,000 open sewers. Lord Stark was immediately swamped with his new duties as Hand of the King. My job was simple, shadow his daughters and ensure no one assassinated him. On our third day in the Red Keep, I was standing guard outside Ned's Solar when a bald, soft-spoken man in silk robes glided down the hallway. He moved with unnatural quietness, his hands tucked into his sleeves. This was Lord Varys, the Master of Whisperers. He was the royal spy master, controlling a network of child spies across the globe. In a game of swords, he fought with secrets. Ah, the mysterious wolf from the north, Varys said, offering a sickeningly sweet smile. You have caused quite a stir in the court, young Arthur. A boy with a monster wolf and a Valyrian blade. The whole city is whispering about you. I triggered my system scan. Target assessed, Lord Varys, the spider level, 5 intelligence, 85, genius tier. Threat level, high, political, 0, physical, current intent, to gauge your loyalties and determine if you can be manipulated. Let them whisper, Lord Varys, I replied smoothly, crossing my arms. Whispers are just wind. They don't cut through steel. Varys chuckled, a high-pitched, breathy sound. Perhaps. But the right whisper in the right ear has ended more dynasties than any sword ever could. It would be a shame if a young man of your talents found himself on the wrong side of the board. I don't play board games, Varys, I said, leaning in slightly, letting my shadow aura leak out just enough to make the temperature drop. I flipped the table. Tell your little birds to stay out of my sky, or I'll start plucking their feathers. Varys's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. The system flashed. Varys is terrified of your unpredictability. A wise warning, Varys bowed slightly, retreating down the hall. Welcome to King's Landing, Arthur. Chapter 24, The Master of Coin. If Varys was the spider in the shadows, Peter Baelish known as Littlefinger was the snake in the grass. Littlefinger was the Master of Coin, essentially the Treasury Secretary. He was a brilliant, deeply ambitious man who owned all the brothels in the city and had climbed the social ladder through sheer, ruthless cunning. He cornered me the next evening in the castle gardens. He was impeccably dressed, sporting a mocking little goatee and a smug smile. I have a proposition for you, Arthur, Littlefinger said, skipping the pleasantries. Lord Stark is a rigid, honorable man. Men like that do not survive long in this city. They snap. When he falls, you will need a new patron. He pulled out a heavy velvet pouch and tossed it to me. I caught it effortlessly. It jingled with the heavy sound of pure gold. There is 10 times that amount waiting for you, Littlefinger continued, his eyes gleaming with greed. Plus land, a title, and a knighthood. All I require is that when the time comes, you look the other way. Be my sword, and you will live like a king. He thought everyone had a price. It was a fair assumption in this world. But he was trying to bribe a god with pocket change. I didn't even open the pouch. With a flick of my wrist, I tossed it over the garden wall, into the churning sea hundreds of feet below. Littlefinger's smug smile vanished. Are you mad? That was a fortune. Your money is worthless to me, Baelish, I said, stepping into his personal space. I was taller than him, and my physical presence made him instantly shrink back. Your politics are worthless. Your brothels and your schemes are dirt beneath my boots. I grabbed him by the front of his expensive silk tunic, lifting him an inch off the ground with zero effort. I am the sworn shield of House Stark, I whispered, staring into his panicked eyes. If I find out you are plotting against Lord Eddard, I won't play a political game. I won't hold a trial. I will just walk into your bedroom one night, and your head will leave your shoulders. Do we understand each other? Target humiliated. Plus 1500 EXP. I dropped him. Littlefinger stumbled, straightening his tunic with shaking hands, his face pale with fury and fear. He hurried away without another word. I had just put a massive target on my back, but I didn't care. The only way to win the Game of Thrones with absolute power was to refuse to play by their rules. Chapter 25, The Tourney of the Hand. To celebrate Ned Stark's appointment as Hand of the King, King Robert threw a massive, obscenely expensive tournament. Knights from all over the continent gathered to joust, fight in melees, and win vast sums of gold. The stands were packed with tens of thousands of cheering peasants and nobles. The Stark family sat in the royal box with the king and queen. I stood behind Ned's chair, arms crossed, watching the violent entertainment. The highlight of the day was the jousting. And the most feared man in the joust was Sir Gregor Clegane, known as the Mountain. To say Gregor was a man was an understatement. He was nearly 8 feet tall, built like a brick fortress, and wore armor so thick a normal horse couldn't carry him. He was a rabid, sadistic monster who killed for pleasure and used a two-handed broadsword with one hand. In the final match, the Mountain was unhorsed by a young, incredibly skilled knight named Sir Loras Tyrell, who had used a clever trick with his horse to win. The Mountain snapped. Furious at being humiliated, Gregor drew his massive sword and attacked Sir Loras on foot. The crowd screamed in panic. Gregor swung his gigantic sword, decapitating Loras's horse in a single strike, sending the young knight crashing to the dirt. The Mountain raised his sword to cleave the defenseless boy in half. Stop him! King Robert roared from the box, but the guards were too far away, frozen in terror at the sight of the giant. Emergency quest triggered, the Mountain's fall. Objective, neutralize Sir Gregor Clegane. Show the realm the gap between a monster and a god. Reward, 50,000 EXP, epic armor set, 10 free attribute points. I didn't run down the stairs. I vaulted straight over the railing of the royal box, dropping 40 feet directly into the center of the arena. I landed with a booming crash, kicking up a massive cloud of dust directly between the Mountain and the downed knight. Gregor Clegane didn't care who I was. Blinded by bloodlust, the 8-foot-tall giant roared and brought his massive, 6-foot-long broadsword crashing down toward my skull with enough force to split a boulder. The entire arena gasped. Ned Stark yelled my name. I didn't draw my sword. I simply raised my left arm, letting my sword god's legacy guide my muscle alignment, and met the falling blade with my steel-braced forearm. Boom. The shockwave blew the dust away. The crowd went completely, utterly silent. I stood in the exact same spot, my boots slightly sunken into the dirt from the impact. The Mountain's massive, heavy steel broadsword was stopped dead, resting against the leather and steel of my bracer. It hadn't even scratched me. Gregor's eyes widened in impossible shock. The strongest man in the world was pushing down with all his might, and I wasn't even flinching. I looked up into his helmet, a terrifying, glowing aura bleeding from my eyes. My turn, I said. Chapter 26, The Fall of the Mountain. To understand the sheer impossibility of what the crowd was witnessing, you have to realize that Gregor Clegane weighed over 400 pounds of pure, murderous muscle. Swinging a sword that weighed as much as a small anvil. And I had just stopped it with my bare forearm. Gregor's face twisted from bloodlust into sheer confusion. He pulled back and swung again, a desperate, horizontal cleave aimed at my waist, meant to cut me in two. I didn't even block this time. I stepped into the swing. With my 65 agility, I slipped inside his guard before his massive blade could even travel halfway. I planted my boots firmly in the dirt, channeled my 50 strength, and drove an uppercut directly into the center of his heavy steel breastplate. Crack boom. The sound of shattering steel and crushing bone echoed like a cannon blast. The force of my punch caved the Mountain's breastplate entirely inward. The 8-foot-tall giant was lifted completely off his feet. He flew backward through the air, traveling a full 20 feet before crashing into the wooden barriers of the arena, shattering them into splinters. He didn't get up. He didn't even twitch. The silence in the arena was absolute. 50,000 people were holding their breath. I had just killed the most feared monster in Westeros with a single punch. I slowly lowered my fist, rolling my shoulder to stretch the muscles. Enemy defeated. Plus 10,000 EXP quest complete, the mountains fall. Rewards distributed, 50,000 EXP, epic armor set, 10 free attribute points. Level up. Host has reached level 28. Behind me, the young knight I had saved, Sir Loras Tyrell, was staring up at me from the dirt, his eyes wide with religious awe. High above in the royal box, King Robert suddenly shattered the silence. He threw his horn of ale into the air and let out a booming, roaring laugh that shook the stands. Gods be good, the king roared, pointing down at me. Did you see that? He punched a hole straight through the mountain. The crowd, realizing the king was celebrating, erupted into deafening cheers. I turned, offered the king a shallow bow, and walked out of the arena as if I had just taken out the trash. Chapter 27, The Dead of Roses. Later that evening, I sat in my private chambers within the Red Keep, reviewing my spoils. I allocated my 10 new free attribute points directly into strength, bringing it to a monstrous 60. I could likely punch through a castle wall now. Then, I pulled the epic armor set from my inventory. Item acquired, Abyssal Dragon Scale Armor, Epic, Stats, plus 200 Defense, plus 10 Agility. Effect, forged from the scales of a forgotten shadow dragon. It is virtually weightless, completely silent, and self-repairing. Imparts a lingering aura of dread on enemies. I equipped it. The plain leather I had been wearing vanished, replaced by a breathtaking suit of armor. It wasn't bulky like a knight's plate. It was sleek, pitch black, and seemed to absorb the light in the room. The scales overlapped perfectly, allowing for total freedom of movement, and a dark, tattered cloak materialized over my shoulders. I looked like a literal shadow assassin. A knock at my door pulled me from my admiration. I opened it to find a stunningly handsome young man and an older, distinguished gentleman wearing clothes made of expensive green and gold silk. The crest on their chests was a golden rose. This was Sir Loras Tyrell, the boy I saved, and his father, Lord Mace Tyrell. To understand the Tyrells, you just need to know one fact: they are the second richest family on the continent, and they command the largest army. They rule the fertile southern lands, and their political influence is matched only by the Lannisters. Arthur, Lord Tyrell said, bowing deeply, a massive sign of respect from a high lord to a commoner. You saved my son's life today. House Tyrell owes you a debt that gold alone cannot repay. If you ever need an army, a fleet, or the wealth of Highgarden, you have but to ask. I am grateful, Lord Tyrell, I replied, my voice echoing slightly with the dread aura of my new armor. Just remember this day when the time comes to choose sides. The realm is about to bleed, and I suggest House Tyrell stands behind the wolf. Mace Tyrell swallowed hard, intimidated by my presence, but he nodded vigorously. I had just secured the backing of the largest army in Westeros without spending a single coin. Chapter 28, Blood in the Streets. While I was securing alliances, Lord Ned Stark was doing what he did best, aggressively seeking the truth, regardless of the danger. Ned had spent weeks investigating a terrible secret. He had finally discovered that the king's children, including the cruel Prince Joffrey, were not the king's true-born sons. They were the product of Queen Cersei's incestuous affair with her twin brother, Jaime. If King Robert found out, he would execute Cersei, Jaime, and all the children. Ned, being too honorable for his own good, had confronted Cersei in private and warned her to flee the city before he told the king. It was a fatal mistake. It gave the Lannisters time to strike back. The next afternoon, Lord Stark was riding through the crowded streets of King's Landing with a small escort of 20 Stark guards. I was walking beside his horse, Ragnarok prowling just behind me. Suddenly, the street was blocked. Jaime Lannister, wearing his golden Kingsguard armor, stepped out of an alleyway. Behind him, 50 Lannister guards in crimson cloaks poured out, surrounding us on all sides. They held spears and crossbows, aiming them directly at Ned Stark's men. Lord Stark, Jaime said, a vicious, desperate smirk on his face. He remembered how I had humiliated him, but he thought numbers would save him this time. My father has been taken prisoner by your wife in the Riverlands. I am here to answer that insult. You are making a mistake, Kingslayer, Ned warned, drawing his sword. His 20 men formed a protective ring around him, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. Kill his men, Jaime ordered his guards, his eyes snapping to me. But leave the freak with the wolf to me. I have a score to settle. The Lannister guards raised their crossbows to slaughter Ned's men. I didn't let them fire. Skill activated, Aura of the Overlord, max power. I unleashed the full, unbridled pressure of my spiritual aura. The air didn't just grow heavy, it turned to lead. A shockwave of pure, crushing dread exploded outward in a 100-yard radius. The 50 Lannister guards froze. The color drained from their faces. Several of them dropped their weapons, others simply collapsed to their knees, clutching their chests as they struggled to breathe under the oppressive weight of my power. Even Jaime Lannister stumbled backward, his golden arrogance shattering as primal terror gripped his heart. I told you, Kingslayer, I whispered, the sound carrying easily across the paralyzed street. I break more than just pride. I drew Eclipse. I didn't need to fight, this was an execution. Moving like a black blur in my abyssal dragon armor, I carved through the paralyzed Lannister guards. I didn't touch Jaime. I just systematically slaughtered his 50 men in exactly 12 seconds. When I stopped, the street was painted red. Jaime stood alone amidst the bodies of his soldiers, trembling so hard his golden armor rattled. Run back to your sister, I commanded him. And tell her the North remembers. Chapter 29, The King's Hunt. Ned Stark was horrified by the slaughter, but he knew I had just saved his life and the lives of his men. The Game of Thrones had officially turned bloody. But I knew the Lannisters weren't done. With Ned Stark threatening to expose Cersei's incest, Cersei needed King Robert dead immediately. And conveniently, the king had gone into the Kingswood on a hunting trip. In the original timeline, Cersei tasked her cousin, Lancel Lannister, the king's squire, with feeding Robert incredibly potent, fortified wine during the hunt. Drunk and slow, the king would be gored by a massive wild boar, leading to a slow, agonizing death and plunging the realm into civil war. I couldn't let that happen. Keeping Robert alive was the ultimate disruption to the plot. I left the city at nightfall on the back of Ragnarok. My direwolf's terrifying speed ate up the miles, and we tracked the royal hunting party deep into the Kingswood by dawn. I found them in a clearing. King Robert, red-faced and heavily intoxicated, was stumbling forward with a hunting spear. A few yards away, a monstrous wild boar the size of a small cow with tusks like scythes was charging directly at him. Lancel Lannister was watching from the sidelines, a cowardly smirk on his face. Robert thrust his spear, but he was too drunk. He missed. The boar lowered its head, ready to rip the king's stomach open. I dropped from the branches of a massive oak tree directly between them. I didn't use a weapon. As the massive beast charged, I planted my feet, reached out with both hands, and caught the boar by its massive, razor-sharp tusks. The kinetic force of a charging, 400-pound boar was immense, but with 60 strength, I didn't even slide an inch in the dirt. The beast squealed in confusion. "A bit too slow, Your Grace," I said over my shoulder to the stunned king. Then, I twisted my wrists violently. Snap! I snapped the boar's neck with my bare hands. I tossed the massive carcass into the dirt, wiping a bit of blood from my gauntlets. King Robert stared at me, then at the dead beast, his drunken haze momentarily pierced by sheer adrenaline. "Arthur," the king gasped, dropping his spear. "What in the seven hells are you doing here?" I turned to look at the trembling squire, Lancel Lannister, who was trying to quietly back away into the bushes. "I am here to save your life, Your Grace," I said, pointing a metal-clad finger at the terrified squire. "Check the wine he's been feeding you. And then we need to ride back to the capital. Your wife is trying to murder you." Chapter 30, the board flipped. The ride back to King's Landing was tense. Once Robert's hangover cleared and the royal hunters confirmed the wine was heavily spiked with a paralyzing agent, the king's jolly demeanor vanished. It was replaced by the terrifying, cold wrath of the warrior who had once crushed a dynasty with a war murder. We rode straight into the courtyard of the Red Keep. Robert didn't even bother dismounting normally, he practically threw himself off his horse and stormed into the Great Hall, demanding Ned Stark be brought to him immediately. When Ned arrived, he saw the king alive, and he saw me standing behind the throne in my black dragon armor. Ned knew instantly that the timeline had fractured in his favor. In a private council meeting, Ned laid out the truth. He presented the evidence of Cersei and Jaime's incest, the illegitimacy of the royal children, and the assassination attempt in the woods. Robert sat on the Iron Throne, a monstrous chair made of 1,000 melted swords, his face a mask of pure, apocalyptic rage. "Guards!" Robert bellowed, his voice echoing through the massive hall. The heavy doors opened. But it wasn't the King's Guards who entered. It was Queen Cersei, flanked by Jaime Lannister and 5 other members of the King's Guard in their white cloaks, backed by dozens of Lannister red cloaks. Varys and Littlefinger watched from the shadows. The spider and the snake were calculating who was going to survive the next 10 minutes. "You look well, husband," Cersei said, masking her panic with cold arrogance. "I heard there was an incident on the hunt." "You treasonous whore," Robert growled, standing up, his hand resting on the hilt of his dagger. "Arrest her. Arrest the Kingslayer. Throw them in the black cells." But the King's Guard didn't move to arrest Cersei. Jaime Lannister drew his sword. The other 5 King's Guard drew theirs. They were bought and paid for by Lannister gold. "The king is drunk and mad," Cersei declared loudly to the room. "Take him to his chambers. If Lord Stark resists, kill him." Jaime smirked, stepping forward with his men. "It seems your reign is over, Robert." Ned Stark drew his sword, and his few northern guards prepared to die defending the king. The odds were incredibly skewed. 5 elite King's Guard and 30 Lannister soldiers against Ned's handful of men. But they had forgotten about the anomaly in the room. I stepped out from the shadows beside the Iron Throne, the dark cloak of my abyssal armor trailing behind me. I drew Eclipse. The Valyrian steel hissed as it cleared the scabbard. "You men swore an oath to protect the king," I said, my voice magnified by my aura, making the very stones of the hall vibrate. "Drop your swords, or I will consider you all traitors to the realm." Jaime hesitated, remembering the courtyard. But Sir Meryn Trant, a cruel, stupid member of the King's Guard, sneered. "You're just one boy in fancy armor," Trant spat. "Kill him." I smiled beneath my dark hood. The Game of Thrones was over. It was time for a massacre. "System," I whispered. "Show them why I'm the monarch." Chapter 31, the Throne Room Massacre. To understand the arrogance of the King's Guard, you have to know that their white armor is made of the finest, thickest steel in the kingdom. They are trained to fight completely surrounded and survive. Sir Meryn Trant actually believed his armor would protect him from a teenager. He lunged at me, his heavy broadsword aimed directly at my chest. I didn't dodge. With 65 agility, I simply raised Eclipse. I didn't parry his blade, I swung directly at his incoming sword arm. The dark, rippling Valyrian steel of my blade met the thick steel of his forearm plate. There was no spark, no jarring clang of metal on metal. Eclipse passed through the king's guard armor, the chainmail beneath it, and the bone of his arm with the exact same resistance as a hot knife slicing through warm butter. Meryn Trant didn't even realize his arm was gone until his severed hand, still gripping his sword, hit the stone floor. A split second later, I spun and cleanly decapitated him. The throne room erupted into pure chaos. The remaining 4 traitorous King's Guard charged me, flanked by 30 Lannister soldiers. Protect the king! Ned Stark roared, holding his ground near the throne, but I was already moving. I became a phantom of black scales and dark steel. I dashed into the crowd of Lannister soldiers. My sword god's legacy allowed me to calculate perfectly lethal trajectories without a conscious thought. I didn't waste a single millimeter of movement. I sidestepped a spear thrust and severed the man's neck. I ducked under a sword swing and drove the pommel of Eclipse into a chest plate, shattering the man's ribs into his lungs. The Lannister guards were dying faster than they could scream. Another King's Guard, Sir Boros Blount, charged me with a warmer. I slid under his wild swing, dragging my Valyrian blade across the unarmored back of his knees, hamstringing him instantly. As he fell, I casually kicked his temple with my steel-toed boot, snapping his neck. In less than 20 seconds, 32 highly trained men were dead on the floor. Jaime Lannister stood alone, his sword shaking in his hands. His sister, Queen Cersei, was backed against a stone pillar, her haughty arrogance replaced by pale, hyperventilating terror. Hostile forces annihilated. Plus 15,000 EXP level up. Host has reached level 30. Jaime let out a desperate, screaming battle cry and charged me. He was the greatest swordsman of his generation, but against a system-enhanced anomaly, he was just a man with a sharp stick. I parried his first strike, letting the kinetic force knock his blade wide. Before he could recover, I stepped in and drove my steel-clad knee directly into his stomach. Jaime folded in half, vomiting onto the polished stones. I grabbed the back of his golden collar, hoisted him up, and threw him violently to the floor at the base of the Iron Throne. I rested the tip of my bloody sword against the back of his neck and looked up at King Robert. The traitors are subdued, Your Grace, I said smoothly, not even out of breath. Chapter 32, The King's Justice. The Great Hall was completely silent, save for the crackling of the massive fireplaces and the whimpering of Queen Cersei. The stench of blood and voided bowels filled the air. King Robert Baratheon slowly descended the jagged iron steps of his throne. He walked right past me, stepping over the corpses of his former bodyguards, and stood over the wheezing form of Jaime Lannister. You thought you could take my kingdom from me, Kingslayer. Robert growled, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. He kicked Jaime in the ribs, a brutal, bone-crunching blow that sent the Golden Knight sprawling. Robert then turned his furious gaze to his wife. Guards! Seize the queen! Ned Stark's men, finally snapping out of their shock at my display of power, rushed forward and grabbed Cersei. She screamed and thrashed, her crown falling to the bloody floor. Throw them in the black cells, Robert commanded, his face purple with rage. Send ravens to every corner of the realm. Let them know what the Lannisters have done. Tomorrow, I will take their heads myself. As the guards dragged the screaming queen and the broken Kingslayer away, Robert turned to me. He looked at the mountain of corpses, then at my pristine, black dragon-scale armor. You, Robert breathed, shaking his head in disbelief. You are not a man. You are the warrior himself, come down from the heavens. In this world's main religion, the warrior is a literal god of combat. Coming from the king, this was the highest praise imaginable. I am just a loyal sword, Your Grace, I replied, bowing my head respectfully. Loyal. Robert barked a laugh. You just saved my life, my throne, and exposed a rot that has been festering in my house for a decade. Name your reward, Arthur. Gold? A castle? A highborn wife? It is yours. Before I could answer, my system chimed in my head, vibrating with intense, golden energy. World-altering event complete, the Lion's downfall. You have completely shattered the canonical timeline of Westeros. Calculating rewards, Reward 1, 100,000 EXP. Reward 2, Title, The King's Shadow, grants massive influence over royal decrees. Reward 3, 1x Mythic Egg, Void Dragon variant. My breath hitched slightly at the third reward. A dragon. I ask for no lands, Your Grace, I said, looking Robert in the eyes. Only the authority to deal with the war that is about to come. Because Tywin Lannister will not let the execution of his children go unanswered. Chapter 33, The Lord of Casterly Rock. To understand the impending threat, you have to know who Tywin Lannister is. Tywin is the patriarch of the Lannister family. He is the richest man in the known world, possessing mines that endlessly pump out gold. He is utterly ruthless, completely devoid of empathy, and a brilliant military tactician. Years ago, a lesser house rebelled against him. Tywin completely eradicated their entire bloodline, down to the last infant, just to make a point. When the ravens reached his fortress of Casterly Rock bearing the news that his daughter and son were imprisoned for incest and treason, he didn't weep. He didn't write a letter begging for mercy. He called his banners. Within a week, an army of 40,000 men, the best equipped, most heavily armored force on the continent, was marching toward King's Landing. The capital city was thrown into absolute panic. The city watch only had 2,000 men. King Robert's own loyal armies were weeks away in the Stormlands. Ned Stark's northern army was thousands of miles to the north. In the Lord Commander's tower of the Red Keep, the small council was in chaos. We must sue for peace. Littlefinger urged, pacing the room. If Lord Tywin besieges the city, we will starve within a month. We will do no such thing. King Robert roared, slamming his fist on the table. I will mount the walls myself and smash their golden helmets into paste. Ned Stark looked at the map, his face grim. Robert, we do not have the men. Tywin's vanguard will be at the city gates in 3 days. We cannot hold the walls against 40,000. I sat in the corner of the room, casually polishing the dark steel of Eclipse. Ragnarok was asleep at my feet, his massive, shadowy chest rising and falling slowly. Let them come, I said quietly. The council stopped bickering and looked at me. By now, everyone in the room knew I had slaughtered a room full of Kingsguard in seconds. But an army was a different beast entirely. Arthur, Ned said gently. I know your prowess. But this is not 50 men in a hallway. This is 40,000 men. Cavalry, archers, siege engines. No one man can fight an army. I looked up, a cold, predatory smile spreading across my face. Lord Tywin relies on his gold and his numbers, I said, standing up. He thinks he is the most powerful creature in Westeros. I am going to teach him a lesson in humility. Chapter 34, The Void Emperor. I left the council chamber and retreated to the highest, most secluded balcony of the Red Keep, overlooking the narrow sea. It was time. I opened my system inventory and selected the mythic egg. A massive object materialized in my hands. It was the size of a boulder, completely black, but not like obsidian. It looked like a tear in the fabric of reality itself, a vortex of swirling, starry purple and pitch-black nothingness. The heat radiating off it was immense. To the people of Westeros, dragons had been extinct for over 150 years. The last ones were small, stunted, and sickly. The ancient dragons of old were the size of flying castles, capable of melting entire cities with a single breath. Would you like to hatch the mythic void dragon egg? Yes. The egg didn't crack, it imploded. A silent shockwave of pure, purple energy blasted outward, shattering the glass windows of the balcony and throwing me back a step. Where the egg had been, a creature now sat. It wasn't a fragile, squawking hatchling. The system's magic bypassed natural biology completely. The dragon was already the size of a large warhorse, and it was growing by the second. Its scales were the color of deep space, shimmering with a dark, ethereal purple light. Its eyes were 2 burning supernovas of violet fire. It had no horns, just a sleek, aerodynamic skull that looked terrifyingly alien. Familiar hatched, mythic void emperor dragon, please name your familiar. Oblivion, I whispered. The dragon let out a screech that didn't sound like an animal. It sounded like metal tearing apart under immense pressure. It spread its wings, massive, leathery sails of pure darkness, and took to the sky. It circled the Red Keep once, its body rapidly expanding as the system's magic force fed it power. By the time it landed back on the balcony, shaking the entire stone structure, it was the size of a small house. I reached out and pressed my hand against its scalding hot snout. A mental link, far stronger than the one I had with Ragnarok, snapped into place. I could feel its absolute, predatory hunger, and its utter devotion to me. Familiar status, Oblivion type, Void Dragon. Abilities, Ether Breath, fires a beam of concentrated, obliterating plasma, void scales, immune to all physical and magical damage below level 100. I smiled. Tywin Lannister was bringing an army. I was bringing the apocalypse. Chapter 35, The March of the Monarch. 3 days later, the golden banners of House Lannister appeared on the horizon. 40,000 men marched in perfect, terrifying synchronization. The ground shook with the beat of their drums and the march of 10,000 heavy cavalry horses. Tywin Lannister had arrayed his massive host perfectly outside the walls of King's Landing, setting up siege lines, trebuchets, and massive command tents. The city bells were ringing in a constant, panicked frenzy. The peasants were barricading their doors. King Robert was on the battlements, wearing his antlered helmet, screaming defiance at the golden army below. I stood in the courtyard, wearing my abyssal dragon scale armor. Ragnarok, my giant shadow dire wolf, was at my side, practically vibrating with excitement. Lord Ned Stark hurried down the stone steps, fully armored. Arthur. The king is ordering the city watch to the walls. Where are you going? Open the main gate, Lord Stark, I said simply. Ned stopped in his tracks, staring at me like I had lost my mind. What? Arthur, there are 40,000 men out there. If we open the gates, the city falls. They aren't here for the city, I said. They're here for the king's head. I'm going to go have a chat with Lord Tywin. Without waiting for his permission, I walked toward the massive, iron-reinforced wooden gates of the city. The terrified guards, seeing the boy who had slaughtered the king's guard, scrambled to follow my unspoken command. With the grinding of massive chains, the great doors of King's Landing slowly groaned open. I walked out alone. Just me and my massive shadow wolf. The Lannister army, seeing the gates open, halted their preparations. A murmur rippled through the front lines. They expected a desperate cavalry charge or a messenger waving a white flag. They didn't expect a single teenager in black armor. I stopped about 100 yards from the Lannister vanguard. I could see Tywin Lannister himself, sitting atop a magnificent white warhorse, wearing crimson armor laced with gold. I took a deep breath and channeled my aura of the Overlord directly into my vocal cords. Lord Tywin. My voice boomed like rolling thunder, washing over the entire army of 40,000 men. Horses panicked and reared. Men clutched their ears. I am Arthur, the King's shadow. You have brought an army to die for a daughter who committed treason. Tywin Lannister's face was a mask of cold stone, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. A single boy was challenging him. Tywin raised his hand and chopped it forward. It was an order to his archers. 3,000 Lannister bowmen drew their strings and loosed. The sky instantly darkened as a massive, lethal cloud of 3,000 steel-tipped arrows arced through the air, raining down directly onto my position. I didn't move. I didn't raise a shield. Oblivion, I whispered through our mental link. The sky above me suddenly distorted. A massive shape of pure, swirling darkness descended from the clouds with the speed of a falling star. Oblivion landed directly in front of me, its massive, house-sized body shielding me completely. The 3,000 arrows rained down upon its dark, ethereal scales. They didn't bounce off, they simply disintegrated into ash upon contact with the Void Dragon's hide. The Lannister army froze in absolute, mind-shattering horror. Oblivion reared its terrifying, alien head back, opened its maw, and a blindingly bright purple light began to gather in its throat. The Game of Thrones was played with armies and politics. I was about to flip the board into the sun. Chapter 36, The Ether Breath. To the 40,000 men of the Lannister army, dragons were a myth. They were old bones in the basement of the Red Keep, fairy tales told by nurses to frighten children. When Oblivion descended from the clouds, that myth became a waking, apocalyptic nightmare. The Void Dragon didn't breathe fire. Fire is a chemical reaction. What Oblivion unleashed was pure, concentrated cosmic annihilation. The purple light in the dragon's throat reached a blinding crescendo. Then, with a sound like reality itself tearing in half, a massive beam of swirling, violet plasma erupted from its maw. The beam struck the center of the Lannister vanguard. There was no explosion, no screams of burning men. Anything the violet beam touched simply ceased to exist. It vaporized thick steel armor, wooden siege towers, war horses, and the men riding them in a fraction of a second. I directed Oblivion's mind, sweeping the beam in a wide arc across the siege lines. A trench of glowing, molten glass 50 feet deep and half a mile long was instantly carved into the earth. The massive trebuchets Tywin had built to smash the city walls were turned to drifting ash before they could even cast a shadow. When Oblivion closed its jaws, the silence that followed was deafening. Nearly 5,000 Lannister soldiers had been erased from the world in less than 10 seconds. The remaining 35,000 men didn't retreat in an orderly fashion. They broke. The sight of absolute, godlike destruction shattered their morale into a million pieces. Weapons were dropped, shields were abandoned, and a chaotic, screaming stampede of men and horses fled in every direction. Except for one man. Lord Tywin Lannister's white warhorse had bucked him off in terror. The most powerful lord in Westeros was covered in dirt, sitting on his knees just yards away from the glowing trench of molten glass. His pristine crimson and gold armor was covered in the ash of his own vanguard. I walked forward, my black dragon scale boots crunching on the scorched earth. Ragnarok prowled beside me, letting out a low, rumbling growl. Tywin slowly looked up at me. For the first time in his life, the brilliant, ruthless patriarch of House Lannister had absolutely no strategy, no cunning words, and no gold that could save him. You. Tywin croaked, his voice devoid of its usual icy command. He looked up at the massive, shadowy bulk of Oblivion looming behind me. What are you? I am the end of your game, Lord Tywin, I said, my voice cold and absolute. I reached down, grabbed the front of his incredibly expensive breastplate, and lifted the Lord of Casterly Rock off his feet with one hand. Enemy army routed. Plus 50,000 EXP. Level up. Host has reached level 35. New skill unlocked, Domination, passive, enemies of lower level will naturally submit to your presence. Come, I told the Broken Lord. The king is waiting. Chapter 37, The Lion's Submission. The Great Hall of the Red Keep was packed to the brim. Every noble, knight, and servant in the castle had crowded in to witness the impossible. King Robert Baratheon sat on the Iron Throne, a massive, booming grin on his face. Lord Ned Stark stood beside him, looking completely overwhelmed by how rapidly the world had shifted. I walked through the massive oak doors, dragging Tywin Lannister by his collar, and threw him to the polished stone floor at the base of the throne. The Lannister army is broken, Your Grace, I announced, my voice echoing through the silent hall. Their commander is yours to judge. Tywin slowly pushed himself up to his knees. He looked at the king, then at his daughter Cersei and his son Jaime, who had been dragged up from the dungeons in chains to witness this. The Golden Twins looked like walking corpses, their arrogance completely stripped away. Tywin, Robert boomed, his voice dripping with triumphant venom. You marched an army on my city. Your daughter tried to have me murdered and passed off bastard children as my heirs. What do you have to say for yourself? Tywin Lannister was a pragmatic man. He looked at me, standing there in my abyssal armor, knowing a dragon the size of a house was perched on the walls outside. He knew House Lannister was finished. I yield, Your Grace, Tywin said softly, bowing his head. It was a sight no one in Westeros ever thought they would see. House Lannister surrenders. Robert didn't show mercy. He stripped House Lannister of all their gold mines, their lands, and their titles. He sentenced Cersei and Jaime to death for high treason. Tywin was forced to watch as the executioner's sword fell, ending his dynasty's legacy in a pool of blood on the throne room floor. Tywin himself was sentenced to spend the rest of his life freezing on the Great Wall in the north. The Game of Thrones had been completely dismantled. There would be no War of the Five Kings. There would be no decades of suffering for the common people. By introducing absolute, overwhelming power, I had forced the world into peace. That evening, King Robert called me into his private solar. "You saved my realm, Arthur," Robert said, pouring us both a cup of wine. "The Tyrells are terrified of you. The Martells are silent. Nobody will dare rebel against the crown so long as you and your dragon cast a shadow over the city." He pulled a heavy, solid gold medallion from his desk and tossed it to me. "I am naming you protector of the realm," the king declared. "You answer to no one but me. You have the authority of the crown wherever you go. Quest complete, the king's shadow. Reward, absolute political immunity in Westeros." I caught the medallion, offering a slight smile. Human politics were finally resolved. But my system wasn't done with me. Suddenly, my interface flashed a blood-red color. A chilling, freezing sound like cracking ice echoed in my mind. Main world quest triggered, the long night. Objective, the true enemy stirs in the deep north. The Night King marches on the world of the living. Annihilate the army of the dead. Reward, max level unlocked, Ascension to godhood. I closed my interface. The real game was just beginning. Chapter 38, Eyes to the North. For the next few weeks, King's Landing enjoyed an unprecedented era of peace and prosperity. With the Lannister gold filling the royal treasury and the threat of my dragon keeping corrupt lords in check, Ned Stark was actually able to govern effectively. But I had no interest in attending council meetings or feasts. I spent my time in the Dragon Pit, a massive domed structure on a hill in the city, where Oblivion rested. Ned Stark found me there one afternoon. The Honorable Lord of Winterfell looked much more relaxed than when he first arrived in the capital, though he still kept a nervous distance from the massive, purple-glowing void dragon. "Arthur," Ned called out. "The king wishes to throw another tourney in your honor. The people are calling you the Dragon Knight." I patted Oblivion's scaly snout. "Tell the king I appreciate the thought, Lord Stark, but I will not be attending. I am leaving the capital tomorrow." Ned frowned, stepping closer. "Leaving? Where are you going?" "The realm is finally at peace." "The realm of men is at peace," I corrected him, turning to face the hand of the king. "But there is a threat far older and far deadlier than Tywin Lannister gathering strength in the extreme north. To understand this world, you have to know about the White Walkers. They are an ancient race of ice demons that bring apocalyptic winter. They raise the dead, turning anyone they kill into mindless, blue-eyed zombies. They had been sleeping for 8,000 years, and everyone thought they were a myth. Everyone except the system." "The north?" Ned asked, his brow furrowing. "Beyond the wall? The wildlings are a nuisance, Arthur, but the Night's Watch keeps them at bay." "Not the wildlings, Ned," I said softly. "The dead are marching. The White Walkers have returned." Ned Stark froze. As a northerner, he grew up on those terrifying legends. He wanted to dismiss it as a fairy tale, but he was looking at a boy who had summoned a mythical direwolf and a magical dragon. If I said the ancient demons were real, he had no choice but to believe me. "Gods," Ned whispered, his face paling. "If that is true, the Night's Watch doesn't have the men. We must call the banners. We must march the royal army north." "No," I said, raising a hand. "An army of ordinary men fighting an army of zombies just gives the enemy more troops when your men fall. I will handle this alone." Ned stared at me. "Alone? Arthur, even with a dragon?" "I won't be alone," I smiled, glancing at Oblivion, who let out a low, eager hiss that sounded like grinding metal. "I'm bringing the apocalypse with me." Chapter 39, The Edge of the World. The next morning, I didn't ride a horse. I climbed onto the massive, spiked back of my void dragon. The journey from King's Landing to the extreme north of the continent would take a rider on horseback months. On the back of Oblivion, tearing through the clouds at supernatural speeds, it took us 4 hours. Thanks to my Conqueror's will passive, the freezing temperatures and thin air at high altitudes didn't affect me at all. As we descended through the grey clouds, the greatest structure in the known world came into view. The wall. Imagine a solid wall of pale blue ice, 700 feet high and stretching for 300 miles from ocean to ocean, cutting the continent in half. It was built thousands of years ago with ancient magic specifically to keep the White Walkers out. At the base of this massive ice structure was Castle Black, the headquarters of the Night's Watch, a brotherhood of exiles, criminals, and bastards sworn to guard the realms of men. When a dragon the size of a castle landed in their courtyard, absolute panic ensued. Alarms rang out. Men scrambled with spears and crossbows, slipping in the snow, terrified out of their minds. I hopped down from Oblivion's back, my black armor contrasting sharply with the pristine white snow. "Hold your fire," a familiar voice shouted. Jon Snow, Ned Stark's bastard son whom I had befriended in Winterfell, pushed his way to the front of the terrified men. He was dressed in the heavy black furs of the Night's Watch. He stared at me in disbelief. "Arthur." Jon gaped. "By the old gods, word reached us of what happened in the capital, but we thought they were drunkards' tales." "Hello, Jon," I said casually, walking toward him while the rest of the Night's Watch cowered away from my dragon. "I need the gate opened." I'm going beyond the wall. The Lord Commander of the Watch, an old, stern man named Georg Mormont, stepped forward. No man goes beyond the wall alone, boy. And certainly not right now. Our rangers are reporting impossible things. Whole villages slaughtered, the bodies gone. The cold is unnatural. I know, I replied, triggering my aura of the Overlord just enough to calm their panicked minds and assert authority. That's exactly why I'm here. Open the gate, Commander. The long night ends today. Chapter 40, The True Monarch. The tunnel through the base of the wall was dark, freezing, and incredibly long. When the heavy iron gates on the northern side finally groaned open, I stepped out into a completely different world. The haunted forest was a sea of dead, frozen trees. The cold here wasn't just weather, it was a magical, malevolent force that sought to drain the life from your bones. I didn't bring Oblivion with me just yet. I told the dragon to wait on top of the wall. I wanted to draw the enemy out first. I walked a few miles into the frozen woods, my high senses scanning the environment. The temperature plummeted violently. The snow stopped falling, frozen mid-air. A thick, unnatural white mist rolled through the trees, obscuring the landscape. Warning, extreme hostile magic detected from the mist, they emerged. Hundreds, then thousands of dead men and women. They were skeletons wrapped in rotting flesh, holding rusted weapons. Their eyes burned with a terrifying, piercing, icy blue light. This was the army of the dead. And parting the sea of zombies came their masters. The White Walkers rode dead, skeletal horses. They were tall, gaunt creatures made of pale ice, wielding weapons of crystal clear, magically sharp ice. At their center was the Night King. He wore ancient, black armor and had a crown of icy horns growing from his skull. He was the literal embodiment of death, a creature that had terrified humanity for 8 millennia. The Night King looked at me. He raised his hands, unleashing a wave of pure, magical terror meant to freeze my soul and drop me to my knees. It hit my conqueror's will and shattered like glass against a steel vault. I didn't even blink. Is that all you've got? I asked, my voice carrying easily through the dead silence of the frozen forest. The Night King frowned, a subtle shift of his icy features. He pointed his crystal sword at me, commanding his army of tens of thousands of zombies to charge and tear me apart. I didn't draw my sword. I didn't take a fighting stance. I just smiled, a cruel, mocking smirk, and looked up into the grey, clouded sky. Oblivion, I whispered through the mental link. The clouds above us violently parted. A roar that shook the very foundations of the earth echoed across the frozen wasteland. The shadow of the Void Emperor fell over the army of the dead. Burn it all. Chapter 41, The Void's Embrace. To understand the White Walkers, you have to realize that they are practically immune to normal weapons. Steel shatters against their ice magic. Normal fire barely slows them down. For 8,000 years, they were the ultimate, unstoppable force of nature in this world. But my dragon was a force from beyond nature. Oblivion descended from the clouds like a falling meteor. The massive Void Emperor didn't even bother landing. It hovered 50 feet above the army of the dead, its pitch black, starry scales absorbing the meager light of the frozen north. The Night King looked up, his icy blue eyes narrowing. In the history of this world, the Night King had killed dragons before. He raised his hand, and a massive, magically condensed spear of pure, unmelting ice materialized in his grip. With terrifying, superhuman strength, he hurled the ice spear directly at Oblivion's chest. In the normal story, a spear like that would pierce a dragon's heart and kill it instantly. The ice spear struck Oblivion dead center. Tink. The sound was like a pebble bouncing off a tank. The Night King's ultimate magical weapon hit Oblivion's void scales, which made it immune to anything below level 100 and instantly shattered into a puff of harmless snow. Oblivion didn't even flinch. It opened its massive jaws. The purple light gathered, and then the ether breath was unleashed. It was a torrential beam of obliterating plasma. It swept across the haunted forest in a wide, devastating arc. There was no fire, no smoke. Where the violet beam touched the army of the dead, the zombies didn't burn, they were atomized. Tens of thousands of rotting corpses, ancient skeletons, and resurrected giants were erased from existence in a matter of seconds. The freezing mist evaporated, replaced by the smell of ozone and superheated air. When Oblivion closed its jaws, the once massive army of the dead was gone. All that remained was a massive, glowing trench of scorched earth, and a handful of White Walker generals who had managed to stay out of the beam's direct path. The Night King stood amidst the ashes of his army, holding a sword of crystal ice, staring at me in absolute, incomprehensible silence. Chapter 42, The Shattered Crown. I held up a hand, mentally commanding Oblivion to hold its fire. The Void Dragon landed behind me, folding its massive wings, its purple eyes locked onto the remaining ice demons. Ragnarok, my shadow dire wolf, stood at my side, his teeth bared in a feral snarl. You've had 8,000 years to prepare for this, I called out, drawing a clips from its scabbard. The dark Valyrian steel hummed, eager for the kill. Let's see if you learned any new tricks. 5 White Walker generals charged me. They moved with supernatural speed, gliding across the snow without leaving footprints, their ice blades raised to cut me down. With my 65 agility, they were moving in slow motion. The first general swung his ice sword in a horizontal arc. I met it head on with eclipse. To a normal man, crossing blades with a White Walker means your steel freezes and shatters. But Valyrian steel is forged with dragon fire and magic. Crack. My blade sliced straight through his magical weapon, shattering it into a million glittering shards, and continued in a smooth arc right through his neck. The White Walker didn't bleed. The moment my blade severed its head, its entire body violently shattered into a pile of crushed ice, like a dropped glass statue. I didn't stop moving. I spun, ducking under a thrust from the second general, and drove the pommel of my sword into its chest, shattering it instantly. I pivoted, unleashing a flurry of perfectly executed strikes driven by my sword god's legacy. 3 seconds. 5 shattered piles of ice. I stood alone against the Night King. He didn't run. He was the embodiment of death, and death doesn't retreat. He stepped forward, raising his own massive blade of clear, magical ice. He swung at my head with enough force to cleave a boulder. I didn't block. I just reached out with my left, armor-clad hand and caught the blade of his ice sword in my palm. The magical cold tried to instantly freeze my blood, but my 100 vitality and Conqueror's will passively rejected the magic. The Night King's eyes widened in absolute shock. "Checkmate," I whispered. I thrust Eclipse forward, driving the Valyrian steel directly through his icy breastplate and into his heart. The Night King froze, letting go of his sword. A high-pitched, shrieking sound like glaciers tearing apart erupted from his body. Cracks of glowing blue light spread rapidly across his skin. With a deafening explosion of magical energy, the Night King shattered into a billion pieces of falling snow. Chapter 43, Ascension. The moment the Night King died, the magic holding the eternal winter together broke. The heavy, grey clouds above the haunted forest instantly dissolved, ripped apart by a sudden, incredibly warm wind. For the first time in thousands of years, the bright, golden rays of the sun pierced through to the extreme north, instantly beginning to melt the frost on the dead trees. And then, the system chimed. It wasn't the usual crisp, synthetic ping. It was a massive, choral roar that seemed to vibrate through the very fabric of the universe. Main world quest complete, the long night the true enemy has been annihilated. Calculating final rewards. The translucent blue screens shattered, replaced by a blinding, golden interface that filled my entire vision. Host has reached max level. Limiter removed. Initiating ascension to godhood, I dropped to my knees in the snow as a pillar of pure, golden cosmic energy slammed down from the sky, engulfing me entirely. It wasn't painful. It was the most profound sensation of completeness I could ever imagine. I could feel my physical form dissolving and reforming on a molecular level. My stats strength, agility, vitality, intelligence, charisma which were previously kept by numbers, simply vanished from the interface, replaced by a single, glowing symbol, infinity. I didn't just understand martial arts anymore, I understood the kinetic laws of the universe. I didn't just have high vitality, I was entirely unbound by age, disease, or death. I could hear the heartbeat of every living creature on the continent. I could feel the rotation of the planet beneath my boots. The golden pillar faded. I stood up. My abyssal dragon armor had transformed. It was no longer black, it was a pristine, glowing white and gold, radiating an aura of absolute, terrifying divinity. I looked at Oblivion and Ragnarok. Both of my familiars bowed their heads, pressing them into the melting snow, subjugated entirely by the presence of a true, living god. I had beaten the game. Chapter 44, The God of Westeros. When I returned to King's Landing, I didn't arrive quietly. I flew in on Oblivion at high noon. The dragon's massive shadow blanketed the entire city. I landed directly in the courtyard of the Red Keep. King Robert, Ned Stark, and the entire royal court had rushed out to see what was happening. When I stepped off the dragon's back, a collective, involuntary gasp echoed through the courtyard. They couldn't comprehend what they were looking at. The aura of the Overlord had evolved into something divine. To their eyes, I was quite literally glowing with a soft, golden light. My presence was so overwhelmingly powerful, so utterly absolute, that the guards dropped their weapons. King Robert Baratheon, the man who had crushed a dynasty with a warmer and bowed to no one, fell to his knees on the cobblestones. Ned Stark followed, and within seconds, every single person in the courtyard was kneeling in absolute, terrified reverence. "The long night is over, Your Grace," I said. My voice was no longer just loud, it resonated directly within the minds of everyone in the city. I walked past the kneeling king and entered the Great Hall, stopping before the Iron Throne. To understand the Iron Throne, you must know it was forged by a dragon's fire out of 1,000 swords of defeated enemies. It is a jagged, ugly chair meant to symbolize that a king should never sit easy. It was the ultimate prize in the Game of Thrones, the reason for all the backstabbing, poison, and war. It disgusted me. It was a monument to petty, mortal greed. I raised my hand. I didn't use a spell, I just exerted my will over reality. The massive Iron Throne began to glow cherry red, then white hot. The 1,000 swords instantly liquefied, melting into a glowing puddle of molten steel that flowed harmlessly into the drains of the stone floor. The ultimate prize of this world was gone in seconds. The king and his court had rushed into the hall, watching in stunned silence as the symbol of royal power was erased. "There will be no more games," I declared to the silent room. "There will be no more scheming in the shadows, no more starving peasants so that lords can wear finer silks. The age of kings is over." Chapter 45, Beyond the Horizon. The transition of power was bloodless, simply because resistance was physically impossible. I didn't take a crown, and I didn't build a new throne. I didn't need to. My word became the absolute law of the continent. King Robert happily stepped down, given a massive estate in the Stormlands where he could drink and hunt in peace for the rest of his days, relieved of the burden of ruling. Lord Ned Stark was named the Grand Steward of Westeros, tasked with running the day-to-day logistics of the realm with absolute, uncorruptible honor, backed by my divine authority. He brought his family back to Winterfell, finally at peace. Jon Snow was released from his vows at the Night's Watch, since the wall was no longer needed, and was legitimized as a true Stark. Within a year, poverty in King's Landing was eradicated. The great houses Lannister, Tyrell, Martell had surrendered their massive armies, their swords beaten into plowshares. Crime practically vanished, because my cosmic awareness meant I knew the intent of every murderer before they could strike. Westeros entered an eternal golden age. I stood on the highest balcony of the Red Keep, looking out over the sparkling blue waters of the narrow sea. Ragnarok was asleep at my feet, and Oblivion was soaring high above the clouds, a guardian in the sky. I had conquered this world. I had saved it from itself. But as I looked across the sea toward the vast, unexplored continent of Essos, a familiar chime rang in my mind. It was a sound I hadn't heard since my ascension. World status, pacified and secured. Host has achieved absolute dominion over Realm 01. Notice, the Supreme Monarch system is boundless. A new, glowing portal began to form in the air in front of me, swirling with the colors of 1,000 different galaxies. Multiverse gate unlocked. Would you like to proceed to Realm 02? I smiled, feeling the familiar thrill of the unknown coursing through my immortal veins. The Game of Thrones was over. But the path of the conqueror never truly ends. Let's go, I whispered. I stepped into the light, leaving the world of Westeros behind in eternal peace, ready to bring my absolute power to whatever universe dared to challenge me next. Chapter 46, The Second Realm. The portal from Westeros was not a physical doorway, it was a swirling vortex of cosmic colors that felt like walking through a wall of cool, electric water. When I stepped out on the other side, the golden sunlight and ocean breeze of King's Landing were instantly replaced by suffocating darkness, the smell of sulfur, and the deafening echo of cracking stone. Realm transition complete. Welcome to Realm 02, Arda. Notice, the host's godhood status and infinite stats remain absolute. You are currently the highest tier existence in this dimension. I stood on a narrow, ancient stone bridge spanning a seemingly bottomless chasm. It was a massive underground dwarven city, carved entirely out of the roots of a mountain. But it wasn't empty. 100 yards ahead of me, a group of 9 exhausted, terrified people were sprinting across the bridge. There was an old man in grey robes holding a glowing wooden staff, an elf with a bow, a dwarf with an axe, a few men holding swords, and 4 very short, barefoot people. To understand this new world, you need to know this is the ultimate battle of good versus evil. These 9 people were on a desperate, secret quest to save their world from a dark lord. But right now, they weren't fighting. They were running for their lives. Behind them, marching out of the darkness of the cavern, was a monster straight out of a nightmare. It was 20 feet tall, wreathed entirely in roaring flames and suffocating black smoke. It had massive, demonic horns, and in its hands, it held a sword of fire and a whip of pure magma. Target assessed, the Balrog of Morgoth description, an ancient demon of shadow and flame. Threat level, irrelevant. The old man in grey a wizard stopped in the middle of the bridge, turning around to face the giant demon alone, ready to sacrifice his life so the others could escape. You cannot pass, the old wizard bellowed, slamming his glowing staff onto the stone bridge. I am a servant of the secret fire. The giant demon roared, stepping onto the bridge, raising its flaming sword to crush the old man into ash. I cracked my neck. It was time to introduce myself to the neighbors. Chapter 47, Shadow and Flame. I didn't run. With my infinite agility, distance was merely a suggestion. I vanished from the edge of the chasm and reappeared directly on the bridge, standing between the old wizard and the towering, flaming demon. My pristine, glowing white and gold abyssal armor illuminated the dark cavern like a second sun. The old wizard gasped, stumbling backward. By the Vala, what are you? The Balrog didn't care who I was. It swung its massive, flaming sword down in a brutal arc, intent on cleaving me and the wizard in two. I didn't even draw eclipse. I simply raised my right hand, palm open. Clang. The demon's fiery sword struck my bare, glowing palm. The kinetic force generated a massive shockwave that blew the smoke and flames away, cracking the stone walls of the cavern. But the sword didn't move an inch further. It was like striking a mountain of solid diamond. The Balrog, a creature that had struck terror into the hearts of gods and men for thousands of years, paused. I could almost see the confusion in its burning eyes. A bit warm, aren't you? I smiled. I closed my fist around the blade of the demon's sword. With a casual twist of my wrist, I shattered the magical weapon into 1,000 pieces of harmless, cooling slag. The Balrog let out a deafening, furious roar and lashed out with its magma whip. The fiery cord wrapped tightly around my ankle, and the demon yanked backward, trying to pull me off the bridge and into the bottomless abyss. I didn't budge. My feet were planted with infinite strength. Instead, I grabbed the burning whip with my left hand. Get over here, I commanded. I pulled. The force of my pull was so immense that it lifted the 20-foot-tall, multi-ton demon completely off its feet. The Balrog flew through the air toward me, flailing helplessly. As it flew into my striking range, I pulled my right fist back and punched the demon directly in the center of its chest. Boom. The impact sounded like a nuclear detonation. The shockwave instantly extinguished every flame on the demon's body. The Balrog's chest cavity caved in completely. The sheer force of my punch didn't just kill it. It launched the beast's massive, broken body backward like a bullet, sending it crashing through the cavern walls and disappearing into the darkness forever. I dusted off my glowing armor and turned around to face the 9 travelers. They were all sitting on the ground, their weapons dropped, staring at me with their mouths hanging wide open in absolute, mind-shattering disbelief. Chapter 48, The Ring of Power. The cavern was completely silent, save for the crumbling of the walls where the demon had been launched. I walked slowly across the stone bridge toward the group. The men instinctively reached for their swords, but the old wizard held up a shaking hand to stop them. Who are you, Shining One? The wizard asked, his voice full of deep reverence. My name is Arthur, I replied, the divine aura of my overlord skill radiating a calming, peaceful warmth over them. I'm a traveler from a very different place. It looks like you needed some help. As I stepped closer, a small, curly-haired halfling in the group stumbled backward. He tripped over a rock and fell hard onto his back. From beneath his tunic, a heavy golden ring on a silver chain slipped out and rested on his chest. The moment the ring was exposed, the air in the cavern seemed to grow heavy. To a non-viewer of this world, you must understand what this ring is. It is the One Ring. It was forged by the Dark Lord Sauron, containing all of his malice, cruelty and will to dominate all life. It has a mind of its own. It corrupts anyone who touches it, twisting their desires and turning them into slaves of evil. The ring sensed me. It sensed my immense, boundless power. Suddenly, a voice echoed in my head. It wasn't the system. It was a dark, whispering, ancient voice, dripping with seduction. Take me, the ring whispered in my mind. With my power, you could rule this world. You could be the master of all living things. Claim me, and become a god of darkness. I almost laughed out loud. This piece of jewelry was trying to corrupt a being with infinite stats and a passive absolute immunity to mental attacks, conqueror's will. It was like an ant trying to mind control a galaxy. I reached down and grabbed the golden ring, snapping the silver chain off the halfling's neck. No, the old wizard and several others screamed in terror. Do not touch it. It will destroy you. I held the One Ring between my thumb and forefinger. It began to burn incredibly hot, glowing with fiery, ancient text, trying desperately to burn my flesh and force its evil into my soul. I didn't feel a thing. You call this a ring of power? I said aloud, speaking directly to the dark magic inside it. It feels like cheap brass. I squeezed my fingers slightly. The indestructible One Ring, the magical artifact that could only be unmade in the fires of the specific volcano it was forged, invisibly bent under the infinite physical pressure of my pinch. The dark whispers in my head turned into a high-pitched, psychic scream of absolute terror. Chapter 49, A Change of Plans. The 9 members of the fellowship stared at the golden ring, visibly dented between my fingers. The old wizard, whose name was Gandalf, fell to his knees. The elf, the dwarf, and the humans followed. They weren't just terrified, they were looking at me as if their creator had just descended from the heavens. In a way, to them, I had. You bent the One Ring, the small halfling Frodo whispered. They said it was indestructible. Nothing is indestructible, Frodo, I said gently, lowering my hand. It just depends on who is doing the destroying. I looked at the group. So, let me guess. You're walking this evil little trinket across the entire continent, sneaking past armies of orcs, to throw it into a volcano. Gandalf looked up, bewildered. How did you know of our quest, Lord Arthur? I know many things, I replied, my glowing aura making the dark cavern feel as bright as day. And honestly, walking sounds incredibly tedious. How far away is this volcano? Mordor lies hundreds of leagues to the east, a rugged-looking human named Aragorn said, awe evident in his voice. It is a barren wasteland guarded by the Dark Lord's armies. The Eye of Sauron sees all who enter. Hundreds of leagues. I sighed. I don't have the patience for a road trip. I turned toward the massive chasm in the cavern and looked up toward the ceiling, thousands of feet above us. System, I commanded. Summon Oblivion. The air inside the mountain grew freezing cold. A vortex of purple cosmic energy ripped open the very fabric of reality just above the chasm. With a roar that shook the entire mountain range, the Void Emperor emerged. My dragon was even larger than when I had left Westeros. It was the size of a modern battleship. Its pitch black, starry scales glowed with a terrifying, ethereal violet light. It hovered in the massive cavern, its eyes locked onto me, completely ignoring the screaming, terrified fellowship behind me. Don't worry, I said, turning back to the group as they scrambled away from the abyss. He's with me. I casually tossed the dented One Ring into the air and caught it. Wait here, I told the fellowship. I'm going to go have a word with this Dark Lord. I'll be back in an hour. Chapter 50, The Fall of the Eye. I vaulted onto Oblivion's massive snout and stood there, my white and gold armor glowing brightly against the dragon's dark scales. We didn't fly out of the cavern's exits. I simply pointed upward. Oblivion unleashed a short, concentrated burst of its ether breath directly at the cavern ceiling. The purple plasma instantly vaporized thousands of tons of solid rock, carving a massive, perfect tunnel straight up to the surface. We shot through the hole like a rocket, bursting out into the bright, open sky of Middle-earth. Take us to Mordor, I commanded through our mental link. With a single flap of its massive wings, Oblivion broke the sound barrier. We crossed the entire continent in minutes. The lush green forests blurred into barren, ashen wastelands. Ahead of us lay Mordor, a nightmarish landscape of jagged black mountains, toxic smoke, and oceans of marching orcs. At the center of it all was Mount Doom, the massive, erupting volcano. Beside it stood Barad-dûr, a colossal, impossibly high black tower. And resting at the very top of that tower was the Dark Lord Sauron. He didn't have a physical body, he manifested as a gigantic, terrifying, wreathed in flames eye, scanning the lands for his lost ring. As my void dragon eclipsed the sun over Mordor, the eye of Sauron snapped upward, locking onto us. Down below, an army of 100,000 orcs pointed their crude weapons at the sky, shrieking in terror at the cosmic beast hovering above their fortress. The eye of Sauron flared brightly, trying to project a wave of dark, paralyzing fear into my mind. I just smiled. I held up my right hand, pinching the golden one ring between my thumb and forefinger, making sure the giant flaming eye could see exactly what I had. The eye-slit pupil contracted in shock and desperate greed. You want your ring back, Sauron? I shouted, my voice magically amplified to boom across the entire wasteland like the voice of a wrathful god. I didn't throw the ring into the volcano. I didn't need to. I channeled a fraction of my infinite strength into my fingers. Crunch. The indestructible one ring didn't just bend this time. It shattered. I ground the golden metal into a fine, sparkling dust between my fingers and let it blow away in the ashen wind. The reaction was instantaneous and apocalyptic. Because Sauron had poured his own soul and life force into the ring, destroying it meant destroying him. The giant flaming eye let out a psychic scream of pure agony that shattered the eardrums of every orc in the army below. The massive black tower of Barad-dûr began to violently collapse, folding in on itself like a house of cards. The earth cracked open, swallowing the fleeing orc armies into the abyss. I stood atop my cosmic dragon, watching the ultimate evil of this universe implode in a matter of seconds. World event complete, the fall of the Dark Lord. Realm 02, Arda has been pacified. I brushed the last specks of gold dust off my gauntlets. Well, I said to Oblivion, looking at the collapsing ruins of the Dark Tower. That was easy. Let's go see what's for lunch back at the cavern. Chapter 51, The Return to the Mountain. I dropped back down through the massive, perfectly circular hole I had blasted in the ceiling of the dwarven cavern. Oblivion's massive, starry wings folded as we descended, the dragon hovering gently over the bottomless chasm before landing on the stone bridge with a heavy thud. I hopped off the dragon's snout. It had been roughly 45 minutes since I left. The 9 members of the fellowship were huddled together near the cavern exit, right where I had left them. They were staring at me as if I were a ghost. The old wizard, Gandalf, leaned heavily on his wooden staff, his eyes wide with a mixture of hope and absolute terror. Lord Arthur, Gandalf breathed, stepping forward cautiously. The air, the heavy shadow that has choked this world for thousands of years, it feels lighter. What did you do? I took a shortcut, I said simply. I uncurled my right hand, letting the last few specks of golden dust fall from my armored glove onto the stone bridge. The one ring is dust, I announced. I crushed it. And because the Dark Lord tied his life to it, his tower collapsed and his army was swallowed by the earth. Sauron is dead. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The sheer impossibility of what I was saying broke their brains. This quest was supposed to take months of starvation, freezing temperatures, and impossible battles. Millions of lives were hanging in the balance. Frodo, the small halfling who had been carrying the ring, suddenly dropped to his knees. He began to weep, but not from sadness. It's gone, Frodo sobbed, clutching his chest where the ring had hung on a chain. The whispers in my head, the weight on my soul. It's completely gone. The rugged human, Aragorn, stared at me, then looked up at the house-sized cosmic dragon looming behind me. He slowly drew his sword, held it by the blade, and knelt, bowing his head in a gesture of absolute fealty. The elf, the dwarf, and the other 3 halflings immediately followed suit, dropping to their knees on the cold stone. You have saved this world, Shining One, Gandalf said, bowing deeply, tears welling in his ancient eyes. You have achieved in an hour what the free peoples of Middle-earth could not achieve in an age. Stand up, all of you, I said gently, my divine aura warming the freezing cavern. We aren't staying in this damp cave. Gather your things. We're going to see the elves. Chapter 52, The Lady of Light. To travel from the dwarven mines to the elven woods of Lothlorien would normally take the fellowship weeks of treacherous hiking. With Oblivion, it took less than 10 minutes. I had the 9 of them sit carefully on the massive, flat scales of my dragon's back. Oblivion flew smoothly, a bubble of my cosmic energy protecting the passengers from the wind and freezing altitudes. We landed in a massive clearing surrounded by towering, golden-leaved trees. This was Lothlorien, the most magical and beautiful sanctuary in the world. Normally, the elves were highly secretive and would shoot trespassers on sight. But when a glowing, house-sized dragon made of pure cosmic energy lands in your forest, you don't fire arrows. You panic. Hundreds of beautiful, immortal elves surrounded the clearing, their bows drawn but trembling. From the crowd, a woman stepped forward. She was breathtakingly beautiful, wearing a flowing white gown, her golden hair glowing with a starlight of its own. This was Galadriel, one of the oldest and most powerful elves alive. She possessed immense telepathic abilities and was practically a demigod in her own right. She looked at the fellowship sliding off the dragon's back, then locked her piercing blue eyes onto me. To understand Galadriel, you must know she can read the minds and souls of anyone she looks at. She attempted to do exactly that to me. She reached out with her mind, expecting to find the thoughts of a powerful wizard or an ancient king. Instead, her telepathy crashed into my absolute, infinite stats. It was like a single drop of water trying to comprehend the depth of an endless, cosmic ocean. Galadriel gasped sharply, stumbling backward as if she had been physically struck. Her husband, Sealborn, rushed to catch her. "My lady!" Aragorn shouted, running forward. "I am unharmed," Galadriel breathed, her voice trembling violently. She looked at me, her immortal composure completely shattered. She fell to her knees in the golden grass. "You are not of the Vala," she whispered, referencing the gods who created her world. "You are older. You are bound by nothing. The song of creation is silent before you." "The Dark Lord is dead, Lady Galadriel," I said, my voice echoing with divine authority. "The ring is destroyed. You don't have to flee across the sea anymore. The world of men and elves is safe." The elves in the clearing lowered their bows, their mouths falling open in shock. A collective, overwhelmed murmur swept through the golden woods. The eternal war was over. Chapter 53, The White City. There was only one piece of business left to settle in this world. Aragorn, the rugged human of the Fellowship, was actually the secret, exiled heir to the throne of the greatest kingdom of men, Gondor. For generations, Gondor had been ruled by corrupt, failing stewards who refused to give up their power. I wasn't going to let Aragorn spend the next year fighting political battles to claim his birthright. "Get back on the dragon," I told him. We left the rest of the Fellowship to celebrate with the elves. I took Aragorn and Gandalf, and Oblivion shot across the sky toward the capital of Gondor, a massive, multi-tiered fortress built into the side of a mountain, known as Minas Tirith. We bypassed the massive outer walls and landed directly in the highest courtyard, right outside the throne room. The city guards rushed out, spears raised in terror at the sight of my dragon, but my passive domination skill flared. The moment they looked at my glowing white and gold armor, their weapons felt too heavy to hold. They dropped their spears and fell to their knees, weeping in the presence of overwhelming divinity. I pushed open the massive doors of the throne room. Sitting on a lesser chair at the base of the empty throne was Dean Thor, the ruling steward. He was a bitter, paranoid old man who was slowly going mad. "Guards!" Dean Thor screamed, spitting food as he stood up. "Arrest these intruders! Arrest that wizard!" He pointed a crooked finger at us. But he didn't realize who he was pointing at. I didn't even speak. I simply unleashed a fraction of my aura of the Overlord. The air in the throne room crystallized with crushing pressure. Denethor's arrogant screams choked in his throat. He fell out of his chair, crashing to the marble floor, his mind instantly subjugated by the sheer weight of my existence. "Your stewardship has ended," I said softly, but the words boomed like thunder in his mind. I turned to Aragorn, who was staring at the empty throne of his ancestors. "Take your seat, King Elisar," I told him. "Rule your people with wisdom. And know that as long as I am watching, no shadow will ever fall over the city again." Aragorn slowly walked forward, stepping past the groveling steward, and took his place on the throne. The era of men had truly begun, bloodlessly and perfectly. Chapter 54, The Departure. With Sauron dead, the ring destroyed, and the rightful king on the throne, the massive armies of evil across the continent shattered. The orcs fled into deep caves where they would eventually die out. The dark magic that had corrupted the lands instantly began to heal. I stood on the highest balcony of Minas Tirith, looking out over the Pelennor fields. The sun was shining brightly, and the air smelled of fresh rain and blooming flowers. Gandalf the wizard stepped up beside me. He didn't look tired anymore, he looked at peace. "You have given us a paradise, Lord Arthur," Gandalf said softly, puffing on a wooden pipe. "The elves are singing your name. The dwarves are carving your likeness into the roots of the mountains. Men will worship you as a god." "I'm not staying to be worshipped, Gandalf," I replied, patting the starry scales of Oblivion, who was resting his massive head on the balcony railing. "My work here is done." Before Gandalf could ask what I meant, the familiar, cosmic chime rang in my mind. World status, pacified and secured. Host has achieved absolute dominion over Realm 02. Multiverse gate unlocked. Would you like to proceed to Realm 03? A swirling, multicolored vortex tore open reality a few feet in front of me. It crackled with chaotic, vibrant energy completely different from the magical essence of Middle-earth. Gandalf took a step back, his eyes widening at the portal. "You journey to other worlds? Other realms in need of saving?" "Something like that," I smiled. "Keep an eye on things here for me, wizard." Without looking back, I stepped into the cosmic vortex, Oblivion instantly vanishing into my familiar inventory. The quiet, ancient magic of Middle-earth faded away, replaced by the violently shifting currents of the multiverse. I was ready for a new challenge. Hopefully, this one would last longer than an hour. Chapter 55, The Sky Opens. The transition was violent. I didn't step out onto a quiet grassy field or a dark cavern. I stepped out into mid-air, hundreds of feet above a sprawling, chaotic metropolis of towering glass and steel. The noise was deafening. Sirens wailed, explosions rocked the concrete, and the air was filled with the screeching roar of alien engines. Realm transition complete. Welcome to Realm 03, Earth 199999, Marvel Cinematic Universe. Current event, the Battle of New York. I suspended myself in midair using my infinite agility and cosmic energy, looking around at my new playground. To a fantasy native, this would be incomprehensible. But I remembered this world perfectly. This was modern-day New York City, and an alien army known as the Chitauri was currently pouring out of a massive blue portal in the sky above a tower with the word Stark plastered on the side. Giant, armored flying space worms were crashing through skyscrapers, shattering glass, and crushing cars. Hundreds of alien soldiers on flying chariots were firing blue energy blasts into the screaming crowds below. Down on the streets, 6 people, a man in a metal suit, a guy with a shield, a green giant, a thunder god, and 2 assassins were desperately trying to fight off the invasion. The Avengers. They were losing. There were simply too many aliens. I hovered there in my pristine, glowing white and gold abyssal god armor, an anomaly floating amidst the chaos. Suddenly, a red and gold blur shot past me. It was Iron Man, being chased by 3 alien chariots firing energy blasts at his back. He did a double take mid-flight, his thrusters sputtering as he noticed a glowing man floating without technology right in his flight path. Jarvis. Tony Stark's voice blared over a loudspeaker from his suit as he dodged a plasma blast. Are you seeing the glowing guy in the World of Warcraft cosplay, or did I get a concussion? I smiled. Fantasy magic was fun, but watching futuristic sci-fi tech fail against absolute, unbound divinity was going to be hilarious. System, I said softly, my voice easily cutting through the sounds of explosions. Summon Oblivion. The sky over New York didn't just darken, it inverted. A vortex of purple cosmic energy eclipsed the sun. The Chitauri aliens stopped firing. The Avengers on the ground looked up in horror. With a roar that shattered every window within a 5-mile radius, the Void Emperor emerged into the Marvel Universe. Let's show these aliens what a real invasion looks like. Chapter 56, The Leviathan's Bane. To understand the terror of the Chitauri invasion, you have to look at their heavy cavalry, the Leviathans. They were flying, heavily armored space worms the size of skyscrapers, capable of swimming through the air and crashing through steel buildings as if they were made of wet cardboard. The Avengers were struggling to kill just one. When Oblivion appeared, the Leviathans suddenly looked like earthworms. My Void Emperor was the size of a modern naval battleship. As it materialized in the sky above Manhattan, the sheer displacement of air shattered every remaining glass window in a 10-block radius. The purple, starry glow of its scales cast an eerie, cosmic twilight over the chaotic city. Jarvis! Iron Man yelled, hovering a few dozen yards away from me, his repulsors glowing bright white. Tell me that's a hologram. Please tell me the alien space whale didn't just summon a bigger, scarier, magic space dragon. Scanners indicate the biological mass is real, sir, the AI's crisp voice replied over the open comms. And the energy readings are unquantifiable. I looked over at the man in the red and gold metal suit. It's not a hologram, Stark. And you might want to back up. 3 Chitauri Leviathans, directed by their hive mind, abandoned their destruction of the city blocks below and turned their massive, armored heads toward Oblivion. They let out deafening, metallic shrieks and charged through the air, intending to ram my dragon. I didn't even need to give a verbal command. Oblivion's jaws unhinged. The terrifying, violet light of the ether breath gathered deep in its throat. But this wasn't the concentrated beam I used on the White Walkers. This was a wide dispersal wave. A torrent of obliterating purple plasma erupted from the dragon's maw, washing over the 3 incoming Leviathans. The futuristic, indestructible alien armor didn't melt, it simply turned into a shower of harmless, glowing ash. The massive beasts were atomized in midair, their momentum carrying nothing but dust that rained down onto the streets of New York. Below us, standing on a ruined overpass, the Avengers Captain America, Black Widow, and Hawkeye stopped fighting and stared at the sky. Thor. Captain America called out over his earpiece, shielding his eyes from the blinding purple light. Is this guy one of yours? I floated effortlessly down toward the streets, my pristine white and gold armor glowing with divine authority. The alien foot soldiers on their flying chariots panicked. They broke formation, firing hundreds of blue plasma bolts directly at me. Warning, incoming hostile energy projectiles. I didn't dodge. I didn't raise a shield. The alien plasma bolts struck my armor and instantly dissipated into harmless sparks. My infinite vitality and absolute defense meant their futuristic weapons felt like a light drizzle of warm rain. My turn, I whispered. Chapter 57, The God of Thunder. I didn't draw Eclipse. I didn't need a sword for this. With a thought, I triggered my domination aura, expanding it to cover a 5-block radius. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic for the alien invaders. The hundreds of Chitauri soldiers flying through the air suddenly felt the crushing, localized gravity of a cosmic god pressing down on their minds. They shrieked in unison. Their flying chariots short-circuited under the intense spiritual pressure. Like rain, hundreds of aliens plummeted from the sky, crashing violently into the asphalt and rooftops, their minds completely shattered before they even hit the ground. I landed gently on a crushed taxi cab in the center of Park Avenue. Suddenly, a massive, roaring figure dropped from a nearby skyscraper, shaking the ground as it landed. It was a giant, incredibly muscular green monster. The Hulk. To the Hulk, Anyone radiating that much power was a challenge. He let out a deafening roar, tearing a chunk of concrete out of the street, and charged directly at me, his massive green fist pulled back for a devastating punch. Hulk, wait! Captain America yelled from down the street, but the green giant was already mid-leap. I stood completely still, my hands resting at my sides. Just as the Hulk's fist was about to connect with my face, a blur of silver and red lightning crashed down from the sky, intercepting the green giant. It was Thor, the Asgardian god of thunder. He wore silver armor and a flowing red cape, and he held a legendary, magical hammer called Mjolnir. He slammed his hammer into the Hulk's chest, knocking the green giant back a few dozen yards into a storefront. Thor turned to face me, his blue eyes narrowed, lightning crackling wildly across his armor. I know not what realm you hail from, sorcerer, Thor bellowed, spinning his hammer by the leather strap, the air humming with electrical power. But you bring a beast of dark magic to Midgard. Yield, or face the wrath of Asgard. In this universe, Thor was a god. He was used to being the most powerful being in the room. He threw Mjolnir. To understand Mjolnir, you have to know it is forged from the heart of a dying star and enchanted by the king of the gods. It cannot be lifted or stopped by anyone who isn't worthy. It flies with the force of a nuclear bomb. I didn't move out of the way. I simply reached out my right hand. Thwom. The legendary hammer slammed perfectly into my palm. The shockwave blew the windows out of the surrounding buildings and kicked up a massive cloud of dust, but my arm didn't move a single millimeter. The lightning instantly died. The hammer sat in my hand, completely inert. Thor froze, his jaw dropping in absolute shock. He reached out his hand, trying to magically summon the hammer back to him. Mjolnir trembled in my grip, but my infinite strength easily overpowered the ancient Asgardian magic. A nice toy, I said, my voice echoing with divine resonance as the dust cleared. But you're not the only god here, Asgardian. I casually tossed Mjolnir back to him. Thor caught it, stumbling backward, looking at me with a mixture of awe and sheer terror. Chapter 58, Closing the Sky. Okay, so he can catch the magic hammer, Iron Man said, landing on the street beside Captain America with a heavy metallic clank. Good to know. Putting that in the do not engage file. So, glowing guy, are you here to help, or do I need to call in a bigger favor? I am here to end this, I replied, floating a few inches off the ground. I looked up at the massive blue portal in the sky. At the top of Stark Tower, a machine powered by a glowing blue cube, the Tesseract, an artifact of infinite space energy, was holding the rift open. Standing on the balcony near the machine was the mastermind of this invasion, Loki, the god of mischief, wearing a horned golden helmet and holding a mind-controlling scepter. I vanished from the street. With infinite agility, I bypassed space itself, reappearing instantly on the balcony of Stark Tower, just a few feet away from Loki. The god of mischief spun around, his green eyes widening as he took in my glowing, divine armor. He raised his glowing blue scepter, pointing it directly at my chest. I don't know what trick you used to tame that beast in the sky, Loki sneered, his arrogance masking his panic. But you are too late. The Chitauri are endless. I am Loki of Asgard, and I am burdened with glorious purpose. You will all kneel before I didn't let him finish his villain speech. I released my aura of the Overlord at point-blank range, focusing the spiritual pressure entirely on him. It was like dropping a mountain on a mouse. Loki's eyes rolled back in his head. The scepter clattered uselessly to the floor. The god of mischief collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut, face planting into the pristine glass floor of the balcony, completely knocked out by the sheer weight of my existence. Enemy subdued. Threat level, insignificant. I stepped over his unconscious body and walked toward the portal generator. A sphere of pure, impenetrable blue energy protected the Tesseract. In the movie, they needed Loki's scepter to pierce the shield because it emitted the same energy signature. I didn't need a scepter. I had infinite strength. I reached my glowing, armored hands forward and pressed them directly against the impenetrable energy shield. The shield hissed and sparked, trying to repel me with the infinite power of space. I pushed harder. The fabric of the shield began to spiderweb with cracks of blinding white light. With a sharp exhale, I dug my fingers into the energy barrier and literally ripped it apart. The machine shattered. I reached in and grabbed the glowing blue Tesseract cube. The moment the cube left the machine, the massive blue portal in the sky snapped shut. The remaining alien soldiers in the city, cut off from their mothership, instantly collapsed, their hive mind connection severed. The invasion was over. Chapter 59, The Shawarma Summit. A few minutes later, the Avengers gathered on the balcony of Stark Tower. They looked exhausted, beaten, and bruised. Captain America was leaning heavily on his shield. Black Widow was out of ammo. Thor was staring at me with a profound, religious wariness. The Hulk had shrunk back down into a tired, shirtless scientist named Bruce Banner. And lying bound and gagged on the floor was Loki. I stood near the edge of the balcony, the Tesseract resting casually in the palm of my hand. My dragon, Oblivion, had shrunk itself down to the size of a hawk and was perched on my shoulder, its starry purple scales shifting like a galaxy. So, Tony Stark said, flipping up his faceplate. The glowing armor, the instant teleportation, catching point breaks hammer. And you just crushed an impenetrable energy shield with your bare hands. Who exactly is your PR guy? My name is Arthur, I said, my voice calm but carrying the unnatural weight of a cosmic entity. I am a traveler. I stepped into your universe a few minutes ago, and it seemed you were making a mess of things. We had it under control, Captain America said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. You were fighting a stalling action, I corrected him smoothly. But you fought bravely. 4 mortals. Thor stepped forward, gripping Mjolnir tightly. You speak of mortals, Arthur. You wield power that eclipses the All-Father. What is your purpose on Midgard? Before I could answer, a sleek, black Quinjet hovered up to the balcony. The ramp lowered, and a man wearing a black leather trench coat and an eye patch strode out. Nick Fury, director of S.H.I.E.L.D. He looked at the bound Loki, then at the Avengers, and finally, his single eye locked onto me. I step out for a coffee, Fury said, his voice dangerously even, and suddenly we have a new player on the board. One who commands a dragon and holds a weapon of mass destruction in his hand. You want to tell me who you are, son? I looked at the super spy. His arrogance was amusing. He thought he could manage everything. I am the new rules, Director Fury, I said softly. I tossed the glowing blue tesseract into my infinite spatial inventory. It vanished into thin air. Fury's eye twitched. I'm going to need that cube back. It belongs to the United States government. It belongs to the universe, I countered. And considering your government's solution to this invasion was to secretly fire a nuclear missile at this city, a missile my dragon ate out of the sky before you even noticed, I think I will hold onto it. Fury froze. The Avengers turned to stare at the director in horror. He's right, Iron Man confirmed, checking his HUD. I tracked a high-yield signature. It vanished in the upper atmosphere 5 minutes ago. Earth is now under my protection, I declared, my divine aura flaring slightly, forcing everyone on the balcony to take an instinctual step back. You will govern yourselves. You will protect your people. But if a threat from the stars comes to this world again, I will handle it. Do we understand each other? No one argued. When a glowing god who casually eats nukes and rips apart energy shields tells you he's in charge, you nod. Chapter 60, The Mad Titan's Gaze. While the Avengers went to eat shawarma in a ruined restaurant down the street, too terrified to invite me, but too respectful to ask me to leave the city, the system finally chimed in my head. World event complete, the Battle of New York. Notice, the host's actions have caused massive ripples across the cosmic fabric of Earth 199999. I stood on the spire of Stark Tower, looking out over the smoking city. The mortals were already beginning to clean up the mess. But I knew this universe wasn't like Westeros or Middle-earth. The threats here weren't just angry lords or flaming demons. They were cosmic forces of nature. Suddenly, my vision shifted. The system interface flared a brilliant, blinding gold. Cosmic entity alert. My infinite awareness expanded, shooting past the atmosphere of Earth, past the solar system, and deep into the darkest corners of the galaxy. I saw him. Sitting on a massive, floating throne of stone in a barren asteroid field was a giant, purple-skinned alien. Thanos. The Mad Titan. He was the one who had given Loki the scepter and the army. He was the one obsessed with bringing balance to the universe by wiping out half of all life. Across the vast, infinite expanse of space, Thanos paused. He slowly leaned forward on his throne, his golden armor gleaming. He couldn't see me, not exactly, but he felt the sudden, violent erasure of his Chitauri army. And more importantly, he felt the presence of a being whose power did not align with the established laws of his universe. A cruel, intrigued smile spread across the Titan's face. The vision snapped back to Earth. Main universe quest triggered, the Infinity Gauntlet. Objective, the Mad Titan seeks the 6 Infinity Stones to rewrite reality. You currently possess 1, the Space Stone. Challenge, a god of absolute stats versus a god of absolute reality. Gather the remaining stones or annihilate the Titan. Reward, mastery over the cosmic laws of creation. I smiled, a genuine, thrilled grin spreading across my face. Westeros had been a playground. Middle-earth had been a brief vacation. But this was a war worth fighting. I reached into my inventory, feeling the cool, infinite energy of the Tesseract humming against my mind. Let him come, I whispered to the wind. I could use a real workout. Chapter 61, The Ancient One's Tea. The Avengers had saved New York, but they were thinking too small. They were concerned with Earth's politics and cleaning up rubble. I was looking at the cosmic chessboard. If the Mad Titan wanted the Infinity Stones, I was going to collect them first. And I knew exactly where the second one was hiding. I didn't fly there. I tapped into the boundless energy of the Tesseract in my inventory, combining it with my infinite agility. Space simply folded around me. I reappeared thousands of miles away, stepping out of the air into a quiet, incense-filled room in Kamartaj, the hidden sanctuary of sorcerers in Nepal. Sitting cross-legged at a low wooden table was a bald woman in yellow robes. The Ancient One. She was the Sorcerer Supreme, tasked with protecting Earth from magical threats. Around her neck hung a golden amulet shaped like an eye, the Eye of Agamotto. She didn't look surprised by my sudden materialization. In fact, she was calmly pouring a second cup of tea. I have watched millions of possible futures, Arthur, the Ancient One said, her voice serene but carrying a heavy undercurrent of wariness. And yet, you appear in none of them. You are a complete anomaly. A blind spot in the fabric of reality. I tend to have that effect on timelines, I said, stepping forward. I didn't draw a weapon. My pristine, glowing white and gold armor hummed softly in the quiet room. I'm here for the necklace. The Ancient One sighed, taking a sip of her tea. The Time Stone is our greatest weapon against the dark dimensions. If I hand it to a being of unknown origin and infinite power, I risk the destruction of this reality. Suddenly, she moved. With centuries of martial and magical experience, her strike was instantaneous. She thrust her palm forward, glowing with intricate orange mandalas, aiming directly for my chest. It was the Astral Push. A spell designed to literally knock a person's soul out of their physical body, rendering them instantly helpless. Her glowing palm struck my armor. Bzzzt. Instead of my soul flying out of my body, a shockwave of golden energy violently rebounded off my chest. The Ancient One was thrown backward, crashing through a wooden screen and sliding across the stone floor. I hadn't moved an inch. My conqueror's will and godhood status meant my soul was infinitely dense. Pushing it was like trying to push a galaxy with a feather. The Ancient One groaned, slowly picking herself up, rubbing her wrist as if she had just punched a solid brick wall. I wasn't trying to hurt you, she murmured, a wry, pained smile forming on her lips. I just needed to know if you could be broken. She reached up, opened the Eye of Agamotto, and pulled out the glowing, emerald green time stone. She walked forward and placed it in my hand. You hold the fabric of space and the flow of time, the Ancient One said, bowing her head deeply. May your wisdom match your absolute power, Supreme Monarch. Item acquired, the Time Stone, Infinity Stone 2/6. Host now possesses absolute dominion over temporal laws. Chapter 62, The Dark Elf's Folly. I absorbed the Time Stone into my spatial inventory, feeling the cool, rippling currents of temporal energy synchronize with my cosmic godhood. I didn't need a golden gauntlet to wield them, my physical body was already an indestructible vessel. 2 down. 4 to go. I knew the reality stone known as the Ether was currently hidden away, waiting to be unleashed by Malekith and the Dark Elves during a cosmic alignment. But with my new mastery over space and time, waiting was for mortals. I closed my eyes, syncing my awareness with the spatial coordinates of the universe. I found the barren, decaying realm of Svartalfheim, the home of the Dark Elves. I stepped forward. Reality warped, and I stepped out onto a landscape of black sand, toxic clouds, and jagged, dead mountains. A massive, cross-shaped alien warship hovered silently over the wasteland. The Dark Elves were in deep hibernation, waiting for the universe to align so they could plunge it back into eternal darkness. Wake up, I whispered. I released a pulse of my aura of the Overlord, projecting it directly into the massive ship. Instantly, alarms wailed. The ship's lights flared in angry, crimson red. Thousands of Dark Elves awoke from their centuries-long slumber in a state of absolute, instinctual panic. The ship's ramp lowered, and Malekith, the pale, scarred leader of the Dark Elves, marched out, flanked by his massive, horned super soldiers known as the Cursed. Who dares disturb the slumber of Svartalfheim? Malekith shrieked, his pale eyes locking onto my glowing, divine armor. Kill the interloper. A dozen cursed warriors, beasts capable of batting away Thor like a ragdoll, charged at me, roaring like demons. I didn't even raise my hands. Temporal law activated, absolute stasis. I tapped into the Time Stone. The universe around me snapped to a halt. The ash falling from the sky froze mid-air. The roaring cursed warriors became perfectly motionless statues, their terrifying faces locked in rage. I walked casually through the frozen battlefield, stepping around the suspended super soldiers. I approached Malekith, who was frozen with his mouth open, mid-shout. I reached out with my space-bending abilities, bypassing the physical world entirely, and pulled a swirling, blood-red liquid out of the dimensional pocket hidden beneath the dark soil. The ether. As soon as my glowing hands touched the liquid, it condensed, hardening into a solid, glowing red gem. Item acquired, the Reality Stone, Infinity Stone 3/6. Host now possesses absolute dominion over the laws of reality. I looked back at the frozen army of Dark Elves. They wanted to return the universe to nothingness. I decided to grant their wish. With a flick of my wrist, channeling the Reality Stone. The entire Dark Elf army and their massive ship didn't explode, they simply turned into a flock of black butterflies that scattered into the toxic wind. I ended the time stasis. Malekith was gone. The threat was erased. 3 stones in less than an hour. Chapter 63, The Morag Intercept. The Power Stone was next. According to this universe's timeline, the Power Stone was locked inside a metal orb in an ancient, flooded temple on the dead planet of Morag. Soon, a human thief named Peter Quill, Star-Lord, was scheduled to steal it, kicking off a massive intergalactic war. I preferred to skip the war. Using the Space Stone, I teleported directly into the heart of the ancient temple on Morag. The air was damp and smelled of stagnant water. I stood in a dark, cavernous room. In the center, suspended in a cage of blue energy, was the metal orb containing the Power Stone. Before I could walk over and take it, the heavy stone doors of the temple hissed open. A man in a red leather trench coat and a metal mask walked in, holding a high-tech scanner. He kicked a small space rat out of his way, tapped a button on his hip, and the mask dissolved, revealing the face of Peter Quill. He put a pair of old foam headphones over his ears and started aggressively lip-syncing and dancing to Come and Get Your Love by Redbone. He grooved his way down the steps, completely oblivious to my presence, using one of the temple's ancient lizards as a fake microphone. He spun around to face the orb and finally saw me. Quill froze mid-dance move, his jaw dropping. He slowly reached up and pulled his headphones down around his neck. The tinny music echoed in the silent temple. Hi, Quill said, his hand slowly drifting toward the alien blasters on his hips. I don't know what kind of glowing, World of Warcraft paladin you're supposed to be, but you're in my spot. That orb is my payday. You don't want this orb, Peter, I said smoothly, walking past him toward the energy cage. Hey, don't touch that. Quill yelled, drawing both of his blasters and aiming them at my back. I will shoot you. I mean it. I'm a notorious outlaw. They call me Star-Lord. No, they don't, I replied. I reached my hand straight through the burning blue energy cage. The protective lasers fried against my infinite vitality without leaving a mark. I grabbed the metal orb and pulled it out. Suddenly, a loud voice barked from the temple entrance. Drop the orb. It was Korath the Pursuer, a cybernetic Kree warrior loyal to the fanatic Ronan the Accuser. He was flanked by a dozen heavily armed Sokka Aaron soldiers, all pointing massive rifles at us. Oh, great, Quill groaned, raising his hands in surrender. Now look what you've done, glowworm. Korath glared at me. Who are you? I'm the guy who is leaving, I said. I didn't use an infinity stone. I just unleashed a fraction of my infinite strength into a casual backhand slap aimed at the air. The air pressure from my swing created a localized, supersonic shockwave. It hit Korath and his soldiers like a freight train. The impact instantly pulverized their armor, their bones, and the stone walls behind them, leaving nothing but a massive, smoking crater where the doorway used to be. Quill fell onto his backside, staring at the crater, then up at me, absolutely hyperventilating in sheer terror. Tell the Ravagers I said hello, I smiled. Item acquired, the Power Stone, Infinity Stone 4/6. Host now possesses absolute dominion over cosmic energy. Chapter 64, The Mind Stones return 4 stones down. The Space Stone, Time Stone, Reality Stone, and Power Stone were now merged with my cosmic inventory. The Soul Stone was hidden on Vormir, requiring a sacrifice I had no intention of making the traditional way. But first, I needed to clean up a loose end back on Earth. The Mind Stone. It was currently encased in Loki's scepter. When the Avengers defeated Loki, S.H.I.E.L.D. confiscated the scepter. But thanks to my omniscience in this timeline, I knew S.H.I.E.L.D. was completely infiltrated by Hydra, a fascist terrorist organization. They were going to use the scepter to create superhumans. Not on my watch. I warped back to Earth, appearing directly inside the highest security vault of the Triskelion, S.H.I.E.L.D.'s massive headquarters in Washington, D.C. The vault was heavily guarded. A dozen elite strike commandos, led by Brock Rumlow, the future villain Crossbones, were currently packing Loki's scepter into a secure, lead-lined briefcase. Standing with them was Alexander Pierce, a high-ranking government official and the secret head of Hydra. When I materialized out of thin air, my white and gold armor illuminating the dark vault, the commandos instantly raised their assault rifles. Fire! Rumlow barked, his face pale with shock. A hail of high-caliber armor-piercing bullets tore through the room. They struck my armor and flattened like wet clay, dropping harmlessly to the floor. I didn't even blink. Hail Hydra, right? I said, stepping forward. Reality law activated, subatomic dissolution. I didn't strike them physically. I used the reality stone. The assault rifles in the hands of the commandos suddenly turned into swarms of angry hornets. The men screamed, dropping the stinging insects, scrambling backward in absolute panic. Alexander Pierce stood frozen, clutching the briefcase with the scepter. You're the anomaly from New York, Pierce stammered, trying to maintain his political composure. Listen to me. We want the same thing. Order. Peace. With your power and our infrastructure, we could reshape the world. I don't need your infrastructure, Pierce, I said, extending my hand. The briefcase violently ripped itself out of his grip, flying across the room and snapping open in my hand. I grabbed the golden scepter. Pierce swallowed hard. If you take that, you declare war on the most powerful organization on this planet. No, I replied, crushing the top of the scepter with my bare hand. The metal cracked and shattered, revealing the glowing, yellow mind stone inside. I declare pest control. I channeled the power stone through my boot and gently tapped the floor. A localized, non-lethal shockwave surged through the Triskelion. Every single Hydra sleeper agent in the building was instantly knocked unconscious, while the loyal S.H.I.E.L.D. agents remained unharmed. I plucked the yellow gem from the shattered scepter. Item acquired, the Mind Stone, Infinity Stone 5/6. Host now possesses absolute dominion over consciousness and thought. Chapter 65, The Mad Titan Arrives. I had 5 of the 6 Infinity Stones. Space, time, reality, power, and mind. I stood on the roof of the Triskelion in Washington, the wind whipping around my glowing armor. I didn't need to go to Vormir for the Soul Stone just yet. Because the universe had noticed what I was doing. When a single entity gathers 5 of the fundamental forces of creation, it acts like a cosmic flare. The sky above the United States suddenly darkened in the middle of the afternoon. It wasn't a cloud. It was a ship. A warship so impossibly massive it blocked out the sun across the entire eastern seaboard. It was the Sanctuary II, the flagship of Thanos. In the original timeline, Thanos waited years, sending his children to do his dirty work, biding his time. But my actions had shattered his plans. I had destroyed his army in New York. I had stolen the stones from his grasp. The Mad Titan was not going to wait. He had come to Earth himself to personally correct the anomaly. A beam of blinding light shot down from the massive warship, striking the courtyard of the Triskelion hundreds of feet below me. When the light faded, a figure stood in the crater. Thanos. He was 9 feet tall, wearing his full, heavy golden armor, and wielding a massive, double-bladed sword that could deflect the power of gods. His purple face was set in a mask of absolute, furious determination. He looked up at the roof, his dark eyes locking onto me. I know what you hold, interloper, Thanos' deep, booming voice echoed across the panicked city, projected by alien technology. You play with forces you cannot possibly comprehend. Bring me the stones, and I will grant your world a quick, painless death. I didn't shout back. I didn't need to. With 5 infinity stones and infinite, godlike stats, I was no longer just a powerful being. I was a fundamental law of nature. I floated off the edge of the roof, drifting slowly down toward the courtyard. As I descended, I pulled Oblivion from my familiar space. The massive, starry purple void dragon materialized in the air above the Triskelion, dwarfing the surrounding buildings, letting out a roar that shook the very foundations of the city. I landed gently on the cracked concrete, a few dozen yards away from the Mad Titan. You talk about balance, Thanos, I said softly, my voice carrying into his mind via the Mind Stone. You think having the universe will save it? You think you are inevitable? I raised my right hand, the 5 infinity stones orbiting my palm like miniature, glowing planets. I am the conqueror, I smiled, a terrifying, divine light burning in my eyes. Let me show you what absolute power really looks like.